It's been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. In accordance with Section 50A of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, the public are excluded from this meeting, as it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be a real and substantial risk to public health due to infection or contamination with coronavirus. This meeting will be live streamed. First of all, I'll ask in terms of the agenda item 1, which is apologies, and we have apologies from the convener, Councillor Alexander, who has been for some time now unwell. That takes us to item 2, which is the declaration of interest, and for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? No? None noted. Fine. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda this morning, which is the minute of meeting of the Planning and Review Committee held on the 6th of December 2021. It's pages 3 to 5 on your agenda. Have we any questions arising from that minute? Are we agreeing the minute? Agreed the minute. Fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. That takes us to item 4, which is the Planning Review Committee procedures. And for this, I'm going to pass you on to our legal officer, Mr. Douglas Blythe, to take us through today's committee procedures. Thank you, Douglas.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, everyone. I'll try and be relatively brief. The Planning Review Committee procedures are outlined at page 6 of the agenda, and this isn't the first time that we have convened to discuss these two applications. So, in short, the Planning Review Committee reviews decisions made by appointed officers on planning matters, and both of today's items fall into that category. The committee first met back in November, and when assessing the papers, concluded that they didn't have enough information with which to make a decision, so decided to conduct an unaccompanied site visit, and thereafter to hold a hearing on specified matters, which is why we're here today. The site visits took place on Wednesday afternoon, and we're just about to embark on the hearings. Understand that they will be conducted in order, so we'll deal with the application in respect of the King Street, Thornhill Road, Falkirk application first, followed by the application for the 9 houses in Torwood. In terms of the hearing procedures, that's very much for the committee to determine, but the guidelines do suggest that it should be a discussion led by the members of the committee. We have several participants for both hearings today. The applicant or their agents, and we have officers from Police Services, Housing Services, and also objectors, Scottish Forestry, and the Council's Roads Department. So those parties have, for the most part, submitted hearing statements which are within the papers, but the hearing would roughly follow the procedures in the papers, but the Provost, when that matter arises, will go through the running order. There'll be an opportunity for members to ask questions of the witnesses, and for the applicant's agent in both cases to sum up at the end. At that point, the committee will then have to determine whether they have enough information at that point to make a decision. And in doing so, decisions of planning review committees are to be treated as any other planning determination, i.e. It's in accordance with the development plan, weighing up policies and material considerations, and giving reasons for any decision that emerges from the committee today. So if there's any other questions, Provost, I can deal with those, but I think that hopefully summarises what we should be what we should be in for today. But I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Douglas. Just to let you know that we have 2 hearings today, and after the first hearings concluded, there will be a 15-minute interval. Just to let you know that at the minute. Now, we go straight to item 5 on our agenda, which is the planning application P200530 full development and erection of 22 flatted dwellings and 1 dwelling house at land to the west of 14 King Street, Thornhill Road, Falkirk. It's pages 11 to 48 on our agenda. And the first part of today's hearing will be for Julie Seidel-Gregory, our planning advisor, to give us a summary of the application in front of us. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you, Provost. I'll make a brief summary this morning. As Mr Blythe advises, this application has already been introduced to the committee. So this review relates to the development of 22 flats and 1 dwelling house at the western edge of Victoria Park on King Street and Thornhill Road, Falkirk. The application site comprises public open space, a footpath and a section of Thornhill Community Centre car park. The application states that the development is for 100% social rented housing. The development would be split over 2 blocks. Block A is shown as fronting the corner of King Street and Thornhill Road. It's a 3-storey block with adjoining 2-storey dwelling house. Block B would front Victoria Park and is shown as being a larger 3-storey block. Materials are shown as being smooth white render, cherry panelling, facing brick and concrete roof tile. Access would be taken off Thornhill Road, and the application shows the development of a new car park for Thornhill Community Centre to compensate for the loss of parking as a result of development. This proposal was refused planning permission on the basis of road safety and affordable housing. This hearing today is to consider 3 specific matters in relation to parking provision, the type of housing proposed and the extent of the town centre. Today's papers include statements from Housing Services at page 26, a statement from Roads at page 34, and there is a town centre map at page 38. I can confirm that members have carried out an unaccompanied inspection of this site. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much for that, Julie. Yes, indeed, we were out on site yesterday. It was very, very beneficial indeed. And at this stage, it's an opportunity for the applicant's agent, Philip Neves, to give us a summary at this hearing. Mr. Neves, this is your opportunity. You'll have between 5 and 10 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Provost. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Turning to the 3 questions that we need to look at, I'll take them all in the order in which that they've been set up. First of all, the town centre, extent of the town centre boundary. The site lies, we've shown it on figure 4 of our appeal statement, and it's shown as a red dot. The site lies 300 metres from the town centre inset in the local development plan and is 150 metres from Central Retail Park, which functions really as the main part of Falkirk's shopping offer. So the site is very close and very accessible to town centre and other services. There are 2 bus stops and 2 bus routes adjacent to the site, and we're in 10 minutes of the railway station. So we think it's a very highly accessible site on a main route into Falkirk. In terms of the type of housing, the site has been designed for social housing, and we have spoken with providers of social housing who are satisfied that it meets all the regulatory standards. As such, there is no reason in our view why it should not be granted planning permission on the basis of what is proposed and what the designs are saying. The design, the layout and room sizes all meet the requirements of the Scottish Housing Regulator, which set the rules for development of affordable housing and social housing. We've spoken with housing operators, and on the granted planning consent, we are confident that there will be a party that would want to take this forward for affordable housing. Now, there has been some discussion about the difference between affordable housing and social housing. Scottish planning policy and the Scottish Government's guidance on affordable housing defines affordable housing as housing for those within need who can't necessarily obtain accommodation through the normal market sources. Social housing is a subset of affordable housing, and it's for those in specific need. There is no actual definition given of social housing in the Scottish Government guidance. So in seeking affordable housing, what we're looking for is planning permission to be able to talk with operators about providing the full range of affordable housing options that are set out in Scottish Government guidance. Falkirk Council's planning policy requires 15% affordable housing on a site of this size, of this scale of development. We are providing 100% affordable housing, which we believe meets the local need, and it's very clear that there is a strong housing need in Falkirk for affordable housing of different types. And so what we would like to do is to obtain planning permission for an affordable housing scheme, which could be for something like mid-market rent, or it could be social housing, which is fully subsidised housing for people in very specific need. The way to secure this would be through a Section 75 agreement, and our client is willing to sign up to 100% affordable housing, which would be a legally binding covenant on the site, which could only be changed at the council's with agreement of the council. And we think that then provides you with the certainty that if you were to grant planning permission today, you are getting an affordable housing scheme, and we would commend that to you because we think it meets a very specific local need in a highly accessible location. In terms of car parking, we're providing 23 flats. There are 9 one-bedroom flats, and there are 14 two-bedroom. We are providing 39 spaces on site, where Falkirk standards require 43. But to put that in context, the 39 spaces that we are providing represents 102% car parking. Now, looking for the extent of car parking that the council is seeking is, we feel, out of step with current thinking in terms of national policy and in terms of evolving policy at a more local level. For example, COP26, the National Planning Framework for Scotland, Scottish planning policy, is all seeking to look to maximum car parking and to reduce car parking numbers rather than having the standards that might have been looked at in the past. We've also been in discussion with housing providers who are telling us that with affordable housing, car ownership is much lower than market housing, private housing for people who own their own homes. One of the housing associations has told us that their normal average is about 38%. So we are providing 152% car parking, but the advice we're getting is that only 38% of the households actually have cars. So we think that actually is probably an over provision. What that means is we don't think that we will be putting pressure on the local roads through car parking and any kind of overspill. And to put it in balance, there's a planning judgment to be made. Decisions are made in accordance with the development plan unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. We feel that the significant housing need that exists in Falkirk needs to be set in balance against the fact that we're not quite at the standards that are required by the council, but we're very, very close to them. Also, if you look at the fact we've got 9 one-bedroom flats, that means 9 of the flats, there's only likely to be 1 car anyway, even if you were to take the view that every household would have a car. So we recommend this application on the basis that it's meeting a housing need. It's got a very, very substantial car parking provision. We're 4 short of where Falkirk Council standards would like us to be, but taking a balance and weighing all the matters into consideration, we feel that as we provided a scheme that meets the requirements of the regulator, we're very close to the town centre, we're very highly accessible. There should be no issue that prevents the grant of planning permission on the basis of lack of car parking. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neves. There will be an opportunity for you to come back in relation to anything that's been said by officers and give you an opportunity to respond. What I would say at this stage to members of the committee is that the procedure, to keep it simple, is that we're going to hear the applicant's agent. We'll hear the planning advisor first, which we had. We hear the applicant's agent. We'll hear from officers. There'll be an opportunity for Mr. Neves to come back in, and then that will be a time when members then can ask questions of anybody in relation to any matters that's been brought forward this morning. Can I just ask at this stage, has Karen Strang managed to get with us yet?
Yeah, I've managed to come in by phone.
That's fine. That's perfect. Thank you very much for that. So what we're going to do at this stage is we'll hear the summary for the planning advisor, Julie Seidel Gregory. Then we've heard from Philip Neves, the applicant's agent, and it's now an opportunity, unfortunately, was for the objector, Mrs. Henderson, to come in. So just for the record, we'll give her the opportunity, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, she's not with us. So it's just for the record and to put on the minute. It's now an opportunity to ask Graham Crawford, Roads Development Unit, to come in and give us a summary, his interpretation of this application. Mr. Crawford.
Hi. This issue with requirements for housing has gone on for quite a while since we adopted the National Roads Development Guide, and I was asked to do a document for planning in view of it. The National Roads Development Guide does not recognise the different house types, all the different names that come from housing. It basically recognises it as a dwelling or a flat, and it bases the parking requirement on the number of bedrooms in that flat. Now, the National Road Development Guide, when it came in, I was asked to review it, went through it, and I saw that housing associations were included in the area where we would give a reduction in parking. I understand that is, whatever's happened, that is to come out of there, the housing association come out of there, and the things are relevant to that. The bottom line for us is, unless a house is supported in some way, we would look for the full parking requirement for any development. And that's where we arrived at the figures for this one. It was 37 parking spaces for the number of dwellings plus 6 visitor parking spaces. The other issue for me in the area is the roads are way oversubscribed. Local roads are oversubscribed in terms of parking requirement. We're losing part of the parking for the community centre. We've lost the informal parking they had round about the fountain, with the fountain being redone. It looks beautiful now, but the parking for there has gone. And technically, that community centre should have between 20 and 30 parking spaces as per the National Roads Development Guide. It's also made it difficult for vans that bring disabled kids into there. At present, they can turn in and reverse against the pavement and get 4 vans in and still use the car park. The layout of the new car park they've been given doesn't facilitate that, because they've got to get past the area where the vans would normally park when kids were coming in. The other issue for me is it's a main road. It's the main access to the retail park for all the large vehicles from both ends. The road's all geared up and mapped accordingly. So that was the reason why I looked for the full parking for that development. There is no way under the Roads Development Guide that I can. They're dwellings in terms of the classification of dwelling or a house in the National Roads Development Guide, no matter who's going into them or what sort of people go into them. And the National Roads Development Guide is also tenure neutral. It doesn't matter if it's a rental house or a house for sale, the same standards apply. So that's where I came to the conclusion that it needed the parking required. I still don't see anything that would change my view on that.
Okay, is that you finished, Mr. Crawford, at the moment?
Yes, that's basically, it's short and sweet for me, quite simple. Unless the accommodation is supported accommodation in some way, we would look for the requirement of full off-street parking, no matter whether it's a rental house or a house for sale. And we are applying that. Everybody else is complying with it. All the developers are complying with that, meeting that standard.
Okay, thank you, sir. Obviously, Mr. Neves will have an opportunity to ask any questions or summarise this. We're now going to Housing Services. We'll have Susan White and Karen Strang, whoever wants to come in first.
I think I'll come in first. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you.
What we were trying to do in our statement was set out some of the background information, aiming to sort of clarify the process around the Strategic Housing Investment Plan, which of course you're all familiar with.
Yeah.
But also assist the understanding of the difference between social housing and affordable housing. And you know, Mr. Neves hit on that when he was doing his own presentation there. So social housing is a subset of affordable housing. it's the responsibility of the Strategic Housing Authority to ensure that any affordable housing, and we work very closely with the planners to ensure that any proposals that come forward for affordable housing are indeed affordable housing, because there's criteria that we've got to check in terms of the cost of the units and whether people are actually going to be able to afford them, and to make sure that they're targeted at people that wouldn't be able to afford to meet their own needs on the housing market without any assistance. So the term social rent and affordable rent seems to be used interchangeably, and Mr. Neves was still, although the application itself talks about 100% social rent, there's still discussion about it being 100% affordable. So we were just trying to clarify in the minds of everybody what the difference between affordable and social is. So affordable can be, so social rent is a subset of it, but it can be mid-market rent, it could be shared equity, it can even be a discounted sale option, as long as we're happy that the levels that are being offered are indeed going to be affordable. But for social rent, as you know, it's different. The council's own supplementary guidance for affordable housing defines social rent as being housing provided at an affordable rent and managed locally by a registered social landlord. So that could be a housing association, it could be a local authority. It's a body that has to be registered by the Scottish Housing Regulator. So that's the definition of social rent. For social rent, there always needs to be an element of public subsidy, and that's where the Strategic Housing Investment Plan comes in. Now, every year we go through a process of checking with the council's own new build team and the registered social landlords what sites they have in the area that they want to put forward for social rent mainly. And there's an assessment process, and we'll allocate funding within the 5-year Strategic Housing Investment Plan. So Link Housing Association had been speaking to the applicant and had come to us, and we were happy to support it, and it had been put into the Strategic Housing Investment Plan. But then in doing their due diligence and doing the assessment to check affordability and various criteria that the housing associations have to check to make sure it's going to meet all the requirements set out by the Scottish Government, they weren't able to take this site forward. Now, at that point, it was withdrawn from the SHIP. We're aware that other local partners that we have, registered social landlords, have been approached, and none of them have been in a position to take it forward either. I believe it's mainly to do with issues over the procurement mechanism. It doesn't suit the housing associations, and that the costs have been too high for them. So I think the housing remains supportive in principle, to get social housing, to get affordable housing, that close to the town centre would be something that we'd be interested in supporting, but only if it meets the requirements. The applicant hasn't been in touch with us about what housing association, what registered social landlord they're working with. So I think it's probably true to say that whilst we've had so many of our existing partners look at it, and as it stands at the moment, they've not been able to make it work. We would need to find a housing association that we're comfortable that would be able to take that forward. So at the moment, there's no allocation in the SHIP. I think the assumption, the statement that the applicant put forward was that they would be able to get on site quite quickly, but for that to happen, we would need to have an allocation in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan for it. it's not in at the moment. That doesn't mean that we might not be able to allocate some money at short notice, but I think the assumption can't be made that it's going to be put in the SHIP.
Okay, thank you. Does your colleague want to come in at this stage? Karen?
No, I've nothing further to add at this stage. Our preference is social rent because we have such a large shortfall within the housing need and demand assessment.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay, thank you. There'll be an opportunity for members to ask questions later on, but it's now an opportunity to go back to the applicant's agent. You've heard the officers speaking in terms of for the Roads Development Unit, and you've heard Housing Services. Now, we don't want you to introduce any new material for your application. We just want to give you an opportunity to address the comments made by, first of all, Graham Crawford, the Roads Development Unit, in relation to the parking situation. Thank you, Mr. Neves.
Thank you. A couple of points to pick up on. First of all, this is private land, so there's always a question that it might get developed. So the question of the impact on the community centre, we don't think is a relevant consideration, because if they've been using the land, they've been using it as a gain, and our clients' interests should not be hampered because of the fact that the community centre have been using land over which they don't actually have any rights. That said, our clients are happy to work with the community centre and help them in any way that they can if it becomes apparent, which we think will be the case, that there will not be the demand for all the car parking spaces being provided. Now, looking at numbers, we are 4 short of where full code standards would say we should be for car parking, but we're well in excess of 1 space per unit. Government guidance is very, very clear, and COP26 was only 6 months ago. It's moving away from the car, it's moving to public transport, it's moving to walking, it's moving to cycling. We're within 300 metres of the town centre. We're 150 metres from the retail park. There's bus routes going past the site. We're very, very highly accessible and serviced. So we feel that car parking simply should not be a reason for refusal. Elsewhere, other local authorities are accepting less than 100% car parking. We had a scheme in Davison's Mains, a very similar location in Edinburgh, where we got planning permission for 30 spaces for 36 units, so significantly under providing. But because of accessibility, it was recognised that there's room for flexibility. And standards are just that. They are standards, they're a guide, they're a starting point. They're not a rule or a law. They don't have to be applied all the time if it can be seen that there are circumstances where they could be relaxed. And we feel that 152% provision, where the housing associations are saying less than half their tenants actually have cars, is sufficient provision. Looking at the nature of the provision and how it would be provided, our client would be keen to have Section 75 based on affordable housing, because that provides the flexibility to have a range of different tenures in discussion with affordable housing providers. We've heard from Mr. Crawford actually that if it were fully social housing, then the standard would be different, so that the car parking issue actually falls away. But we feel that the definition of affordable just gives them more flexibility to be able to provide something that meets local needs. Now, discussions are ongoing with a number of parties, and it all revolves around getting planning permission. If we get planning permission, then the interest and the attention that's paid to the site will necessarily increase. I sit on the board of Port-of-Leith Housing Association, so I know how these things work. As a board member of Housing Association, we don't want to spend time and resources until something's actually got planning permission. When it's got planning permission, it becomes a completely different vehicle that gets much greater scrutiny. We would go out and purchase reports from companies like Wretches to give us information about site viability, rental levels. That doesn't happen if you don't have a site that's got planning permission, because somebody else has got to get planning permission. The Housing Association won't want to spend money until they know the consent is in place. Now, planning permission lasts for 3 years. So if you were to look favourably upon us and grant planning permission, there's 3 years to conduct discussions with the providers, and we are very confident in the discussions that are ongoing will lead to this site being taken and meeting a valuable local need. So on that basis, I commend this site to you and hope that you'll be able to look favourably on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's all you would like to say in terms of the submissions from our officers at this stage, just for the record?
I think so, yes. I suppose one further point is that the retail park is serviced from different directions, and a lot of the servicing for the retail park comes in from the east as well. So I don't think that necessarily that if there's concerns about the functioning of King Street and Thornhill Road, I don't think it impacts on the retail park and how the retail park is serviced. I think that needs to be that's not a consideration that was raised in the determination of this application originally. I don't think it should be a factor that's considered now.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now it is an opportunity for members. Obviously, you've been taking notes. You've been listening to. First of all, we had the summary for the planning advisor. We were out in site and saw for ourselves the situation. We've heard for Graham Crawford, the Roads Development Unit, and we've heard for Susan White and Karen Strang for Housing Services. So there's quite a bit there to take in. But I'm going to go to, is there any member, if you put your hand up, I can see you. And Councillor McCluckie, who would you like to ask questions of at this stage?
I'm asking Mr. Neve, obviously, you got an opportunity, Mr. Neve, there to answer the housing and roads response. And, you know, I'm going to give you another opportunity because you're saying that if we gave you planning permission within another 3 years, how long have you been in talks already with the planners and the housing associations at the moment?
This application has been, there's quite a long period where the application was running through the council system simply because it got bogged down with discussions with the officers. We were trying to move it forward, but it didn't move forward as quickly as we would have liked. Now, we've spoken with the housing team at Link, and we've also spoken with other housing associations, and the financials for this work for them.
Mr. Neves, I asked a question, when did you first make contact with housing and planners in this? I'm not asking for another summary, I'm asking how long have you been in discussions already where no progress has been made on a couple of the fundamental issues relating to the housing?
Well, the application was made in November 2020, as I recall. And
that's enough, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other member, Councillor Hughes or Councillor Kerr, like to Councillor Hughes? You're mute, Gordon.
Apologies to everyone.
Fine.
Mr. Neve, I am still slightly confused, if I put it this way. On the one hand, you talk about affordable housing, and then we're talking about social housing, 100% social housing. I'm trying to get fixed in my mind the model that you're looking for, because listening to you, it seems to me that you're straddling two sides. The social housing side, which is strictly about 100% social rented housing, which falls under the SHIP. But on the other hand, you're then talking about affordable housing, which is slightly different. Could I just clarify in my mind exactly where you are?
Yes, certainly, sir. Well, affordable housing is the umbrella term that's used for any kind of subsidised housing. Social housing is a subset of that. Now, housing associations provide a variety of different forms of affordable housing, of which social housing is a significant driver. What we would be looking to do is to get a Section 75 agreement that looked for 100% affordable housing, but that would then leave the way open if a housing association wanted to provide 100% social housing, because social housing is a subset of affordable housing. If, on the other hand, we had a Section 75 that was 100% social housing, it would rule out the other types of affordable housing that housing associations provide. So we're just looking for that flexibility so that what we could provide could meet the need of a housing association, give them the greatest flexibility.
Can I? Yes. I still think at the end of the day, what you're asking for is riding two horses at the same time. Can I? It's just my perception at the moment till I get my mind totally clarified. Could I ask housing in terms of the criteria in terms of being accepted for the SHIP in terms of the strategic housing investment plan? Would I be correct in thinking that because the developer or the applicant doesn't have a partner, an identified partner, it would appear, and at the same time that by not having an identified partner, that means that there is a question mark over the viability and in relation to financial strategy, and therefore.
No, sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, I'm quite happy to come back to you. I just wanted to ask the question of housing first. If it was a strictly social housing, by definition, in terms of the SHIP, would it mean that by not having a partner, that this basically puts a question mark over the financial strategy of the project in terms of sustainability?
Is that a question?
No, it's not a question to yourself, Mr. Neves. This is a question to housing.
So in theory, you could have a site allocated in the SHIP. So it's a site that we want to support. This would normally happen a few years in advance. And maybe the housing association hasn't been identified on it. What we're trying to do is encourage developers to come to us as quickly, as early on in the process as they can, because that means that we can then start to build in the requirements and the standards. So not having a housing association per se wouldn't mean that it wasn't viable. I think our concern in this case is that we know that there have been several housing associations that we work with already, our trusted partners, that haven't been able to take this site forward for whatever reason, whether it's to do with the method of procurement that's being proposed, or the finances, whether it's been too expensive. From the Strategic Housing Authority's point of view, we always try and encourage the developers to go with housing associations that we're already working with, because it gives them an opportunity to build up more of a management base, which then provides a better service for the local tenants. And it also means they're already familiar with the council's nomination arrangement. But we're not aware of an RSL that's attached to this site that's been able to make it work.
So can I also ask, with your permission, convener, can I ask another question?
You can ask as many questions as you like, sir.
Thank you very much, convener. Just to ask Ms. White, in relation, well, we've looked at obviously the RSL side. On the other side of the equation, I take it that developers or applicants can also look at affordability in relation to just building private houses, in a sense. Would it fall under a private housing development, which then would have, say, a percentage of social rent within it? Is this also an option for the applicant?
Yep.
So Karen may want to come in on this. For all forms of affordable housing, the developer has to work with the housing team to make sure that what they're actually providing is deemed as affordable. And we've been working closely with the planners, for instance, on another site, where it's been quite challenging to ensure that what the developers providing meets our affordable criteria, because we're basing it on people with modest incomes, so it has to be affordable for them. I don't know if that answers your question, Councillor.
No, what I was thinking was if the RSL side of the equation falls through, the flip side of that, there's obviously another alternative options for the applicant. And I was just wondering what type of options there could be. Is one I was asking was, if it was, say, a developer that came forward, they would offer 25% of full affordable housing within the development. So I'm just, when Mr. Neave was talking about flexibility of approach, I'm trying to work out in terms of the flexibility of approach, because all developers have to come to you, whether it's a private developer or not, and look at their options. So in terms of flexibility, does this project being offered, is it too wide in terms of flexibility?
So it's coming back to what I was saying before about us being satisfied that what they're actually proposing constitutes affordable housing. So our preference, as Karen said earlier, is for social rent. That's always what we'll try and get. That's our first point. But you're right, there are the other options. So we might look at a mid-market rent, which is a rent somewhere in between social rent and private sector rents. We've not done a lot of that in Falkirk just because of the local housing allowance levels. It's quite hard to get something, you know, to stack up on the affordability front. And we might do shared equity, and that's something that we're negotiating on another site, where people they own the entire property, but they only have a share, they have an equity share in it. That's something that we look at, or it could even be discounted sale. And there, you know, we work with the district valuer to assess what the market value share would be, how much of a discount the developer is able to and prepared to give, and whether that meets our needs, because we've got bandings on income that we would expect the people to be able to afford. So I don't know, Karen, whether there's anything that you want to add to that.
No, no, there's nothing I really want to add to that, but I would, all I would advise was that we really need to speak to the developer as early in the process as possible, as Susan said.
Right. So thank you very much. Convener, can I ask Mr. Crawford?
Carry on, Councillor.
It's just in relation to the parking situation. And you mentioned within the design of the parking. Now, am I right in thinking that when the parking spaces are removed in terms of the community centre, then there would be 16 on the right-hand side facing downwards. It would be a strip of parking on the way down parallel to the building. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. It's an L shape from the front of you come in the front of the community centre, turn left, and immediately right down the side of the north side of the community centre.
I'm just thinking about the parking spaces for the community centre.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, yeah.
Within that design, is there enough manoeuvrability for cars to actually park in those spaces? Do they have to for example, go in and reverse into a parking space, or can they, or I'm just thinking about the access to it, but in relation to the space between the community centre building itself and the parking space.
They
Because I
have,
do realise,
they have 6 metres, the required 6 metres between the path at the side of the community centre and the parking spaces, which is what you require for cars to come out on the sweat path and move away. There is sufficient space there, yes.
Convener, can I ask a question, or is it too early to ask a question in relation to our unaccompanied site visit?
And who do you want to ask a question to, councillor?
It was really to the roads department.
Yeah, carry on.
And when I was there, looking at the plans, it would appear that the cars have to cross over the path to
Yeah.
get into the site. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It'll be a footway crossing with radii on either side to make it simpler to get in. It's a very small car park in terms of the road's design, and so we're quite happy to have a footway crossing into that car park.
Right. I was just wondering, because am I totally wrong in thinking that this type of crossing, is it similar to what happened in other towns recently, where you had pedestrians and cars walking in roads together? Is it that type of thinking?
Footway crossing, the pedestrians have priority. It's still a footpath. It's a footpath to all intents and purposes, which vehicles can cross.
Yeah, but how do drivers know that pedestrians have right of way?
If they've got a driving licence, they should know that, I think. There's no any need for a sign for that. I think it's been emphasised particularly lately in the new highway code. It's been quite emphatic where pedestrians stand in the hierarchy. And if you haven't read it, heaven help you if you do hit one.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Thank
input,
you, Convener.
Councillor Hughes. Councillor McCluckie, other questions?
Yes, Convener, back to Mr. Neve. You heard, and you heard from a housing association saying that the several social landlords that we know have not been able to make that work. Yet you said you've been in discussions with a number of social landlords. Can you tell us maybe what these other ones are that making progress that housing don't seem to be aware of? As the first question.
Yes, so there were discussions took place with Link, who had an interest, and it was their board approval process that required there to be a planning permission before they would take it forward. The officers at Link were very happy with the financials, and the financials were agreed with the officers. It's just that they had other priorities for things that had planning permission, so they focused their efforts on that. Likewise, in 2018, there were discussions with Weslow, but they had funding issues around the need to spend money on their own portfolio. That's 4 years ago, so those discussions have moved on, and they're in a position to consider this again. So financials are not an issue with this one, and costs have been agreed prior to submitting the planning application with the housing associations. It's simply down to a chain and where they are in their board approval process. So we are confident that if we get planning permission, it will move up the list of priorities.
Mr. Neve, I asked you a question just earlier. I seem to hear a difficulty with the arithmetic. The question I asked was, how long have you been in discussion relating to this site? And you say that 2 years, 2020, you came in, and now you're saying that you've been in discussion with housing associations on that site from 2018. So
Well,
that's 4 years.
Well, this site's got a planning history, and discussions have taken place over time. The planning application went in November 2020.
So the likelihood is at the moment, sir, that these years, 4 years, and no progress has been made that, and you're saying that if we get planning permission, you would expect progress the next 3. The last question is on, you made a statement about private land, and we're aware that's private land, and the fact is at the moment you could put a fence no higher than 1.2 metres, right enough, around that land, and we accept that. But you said that there's likelihood for planning because it's private land. How do you assess that because land's private, that has got a likelihood to be granted planning?
All right, I think a couple of things to pick up on there. First of all, going back to the financials, I have to stress financials are not an issue with this site. If we get planning permission, we are very confident that because of the fact that planning permission changes the whole status of the site, it will move up the list of priorities that the housing associations have already said to us that they're comfortable that they can make it work financially. So that is the point on the financials. The second point is private land. I didn't say that if it's private land, it automatically gets planning permission. What I did say was that as private land, if the community centre has been using it, they've been using it with the permission of the landowner, but that doesn't give them rights over it. So that means that any development doesn't take and have an impact on the community centre, which would be a planning issue. And that is reflected in the reasons for refusal, which didn't reference the community centre.
Any further questions, Councillor McCluskey? You're mute, John.
Sorry, as I say, but I've got one more question, Provost,
Fine.
and I apologise for my abruptness. As I say, I get short of breath because we've all got COVID in the house now, so that's one of the difficulties I've got. But made a statement that Link was the one that seems to be making progress. Now, is there one of the main partners that housing have? Could housing answer the question in their discussions? Does it seem as that Link was ready to move forward if it got planning permission? Because obviously there's always two sides of the story. So what is housing's answer to that question, please?
Link withdrew the site from the SHIP around about this time last year because they weren't able to progress with the development. So I mean, I think there were issues that had been picked up in their due diligence process. I know that they had put forward another proposal about the way that the procurement would be sorted out, but that wasn't something that the developer was happy with. So I think I have to say from our understanding of the discussions with Link and with several other associations that we would need them to tell us that yes, the finances are okay, because that's not what they've been telling us so far.
That answers everything I need to know, and I'm finished at that. Thank you.
I think that was a very, very important question. Councillor Hughes.
I have just one question for clarification, convener. Mr. Neve, you mentioned that you had been in discussions with Weslow. Can I ask you when that was?
Well, Weslow were looking at this in 2018. That wasn't discussions that I was involved in at the time, but that's my understanding. And they withdrew because they needed to spend the money that they had available on their stock. What I would say is if you were to grant planning permission, then planning permission runs for 3 years, but we are confident because of the works that we've done that we would bring on board a housing association within a matter of months. And the fact that we are here arguing the case for the proposal, putting the case forward to you, indicates that our clients are confident that in spending the money to get us to this process, that they will get to a position where a housing association will sign up and the development can progress.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Neve. It was just really when you mentioned Weslow. Weslow at one time did have the ability to offer mid-market rent facilities. Unfortunately, more recently, Weslow, my understanding is that Weslow merged with Link Housing. So I'm assuming that any previous discussions with Weslow would then be, shall we say, part of the Link Management Board.
Well, if that's the case, then yes. But I mean, what I would say to you is that it's to do with board approvals rather than the financials that the housing associations haven't signed up. I would say that we are very, very confident that with the grant of planning permission, we will be able to move this forward. And in that confidence, I think we deliver a very, very significant benefit to Falkirk. So I would hope you'd be able to look favourably upon this and trust in us, because I think the fact that we are here, that we've gone through an appeal, that we've been willing to take the time to progress this, is an indication of our confidence in the quality of the site should be supportive of us, and the fact that we can find somebody and progress this.
Well, thank you, Mr. Neve. Thank you, convener.
Thank you for your input, Councillor. Councillor Kerr, any questions at this stage?
Yes, I have, convener. Listening to officers and members of the committee, I understand, and we all understand, that we need social and affordable housing, and this is a vital part of Falkirk's strategy going forward. And also understand, with regards Mr. Crawford's comments regarding parking, the parking issues. These are guidelines, but they're important guidelines. Can I ask Provost a couple of questions? Yesterday's, or the other day, Wednesday's site visit was very key for me, visiting the site, and it allowed Julie to show us exactly where the entrance to the site is planned. Could I ask our roads colleagues with regard, because right next to the site there's an island, pedestrian island. How would that impact on the entrance to the site? That's my first question, Thomas.
I'll bring in Graham. Mr. Crawford, could you come in and answer that, sir?
Yes, certainly. It won't impact the island or remain where it is. It's within guidelines to be there. It's a footway crossing, not an actual junction.
Okay. My second question, and I don't know who will answer this. It's a bit far away from the road. Will the drainage system be adequate that's proposed for this, for these houses?
Would that be Graham again, do you think?
Yeah, I can't answer it. My flooding colleagues normally deal with these things now, but yes, it's going to Scottish, all the drainage is going to Scottish Water Network, and it's up to them getting approval from Scottish Water that they can take it. As far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any issues for it, but I could be proved wrong on that one. It's just, it was all certainly going to existing combined system.
Right, okay, that's just two questions I wanted, Provost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask a few questions, is any of the rest of the board members, Councillor Hughes, any other questions at this stage?
Not at the moment, convener. Thank you.
Any other questions at this stage, Councillor McCluckie? Okay, thank you. I think it's been quite a very robust debate this morning, but I'm going to come back to Mr. Crawford, because obviously, once again, as members had said, that it was important that we went out and sight, especially for members that weren't really aware of the area. I think we went up and down that road hundreds of times, but actually to stand there and have our planning advisor telling us what was happening, showing us maps of the location, you could have a feel. I think your words, Mr. Crawford, originally was that this would put an increased pressure on the already oversubscribed surrounding on-street parking. I think that's what you said. In terms of the question that Councillor Kerr asked, I was looking at that myself in terms of the improving infrastructure. What would happen there? Because as you say,
the text message sent me, man.
Excuse me, sorry. Just yourself, Mr. Crawford, looking at the infrastructure, how will that go in terms of having an entrance there in such a busy thoroughfare? I know it's going to be, is that a Bellmouth opening going to be, what's going to happen?
I don't think it'll have a great deal of impact on there because we've got the community centre, we've got that, we've got King Street. It's the issue, the biggest issue for me, and I think Mr. Neve tried to make a comment about it. Thornhill Road is the only access to the retail park for large vehicles. That's why we have it lined and marked as we do. And it's you see quite simply, if somebody parks in front of the shop just along there, it comes to a standstill because the road's quite narrow there. We're
Yeah.
trying to encourage all the trucks to come in from the other end of Thornhill Road, from Grangemouth Road, and come in that way. But some of them coming from the north do come out the road and come in that way. So that's the initial thing for us. At the end of the day, they've got the visibility displays required for it. They can do everything. Everything fits. It's all standard in that sense. I've no issue with the access in that sense. It's perfectly acceptable. And the pedestrian crossing would stay. There's no reason to move it. It actually acts as a slowdown for that access. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just go back to our housing services. I'll go back to Susan. Obviously, I've been listening to the questions and listening to how you've been answering them. One thing that did stick out in my mind is if this applicant had somebody signed up, would that make a major difference?
So I think for housing, the way that the affordable housing or social housing is actually delivered, the mechanisms through the Section 75 agreement. So, you know, we have to negotiate with the developer the terms of the Section 75 agreement, and that signs them up to they have to get our written consent to the form of affordable housing. You know, the tenure, the type, the timescales, when it's going to be delivered, and thereafter they've got to comply with that agreement. So, you know, I think from our perspective, we just need to have a discussion with the developer directly and find out what housing association they're talking to. Our Link have already pulled out of the development. Maybe if circumstances change and they offer a different form of procurement, then you know, somebody might be able to make it work. But we don't have that agreement at the moment, so that would need to be something that would be worked on and sought.
Okay, thanks for your clarity on that matter. Okay then, going back to the board members, we've had a very, very robust debate this morning. I'm coming back to you individually just to see what the thinking process is at the minute. And I'm just going to speak to our legal advisor at the minute, Mr. Douglas Blythe. Mr. Blythe, you've been sitting there, you're listening. We've had a robust debate, and we're at a stage now where members are not going to ask any more questions of the people involved today. But it's an opportunity now for members to give their views and thoughts on how we take this matter forward. Are you happy with that?
Absolutely, Provost.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go first to Councillor Hughes. What's your thoughts on this at the minute, Councillor Hughes? Because obviously we'll have to make a determination one way or another. You're mute, Gordon.
Apologies, Provost. Apologies.
Fine.
I always technology was never my thing.
I'm the same.
At the moment, I am slightly, shall we say, undecided at the moment. I haven't quite made up my mind on the application. I am still, shall we say, concerned about the question of affordable housing, or whether it's social housing, and the appropriate mechanisms going forward. And because of that confusion, I am at the moment thinking that in planning terms, I might be wrong here. My esteemed legal person on the call this morning would be able to keep me right. But in terms of sustainability, in terms of planning and business planning, I think that the development falls short at the moment of that clarity.
Okay. Do you want Mr. Blythe to come in on that issue? You've heard what Councillor Hughes has said, that obviously is looking for a bit of guidance for yourself on that issue.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blythe.
I wonder whether Mrs. Siddle-Gregory might be better to field that one in the first instance. What I would, maybe I can lead off by saying I think there has been a bit of discussion about affordable housing versus social rented accommodation, and I think the proposal, as far as I understood it, was that the applicant would be willing to sign up to Section 75 over the entire site on the basis of affordable housing, which would then allow flexibility for a particular scheme to be discussed as the applicant's plans were progressed. And that's something that, I mean, once the Section 75 was in place, that restriction would stay, insofar as the whole site would be restricted to affordable housing. I think the point is that, as has also been discussed, affordable housing has many guises in terms of the council's policy. So there are subsets of it. In theory, the applicant could come back with fully social rented accommodation if they are able to get an RSL on board. But I think what they're looking for is flexibility, that other forms of affordable housing within those categories could satisfy the terms of the Section 75 if that was the way that the committee were minded to go. So I don't know whether Julie can add anything to that.
Julie, anything?
Yes, thank you, Provost. Thank you, Douglas. But what I would say is, and it probably links back to the discussion that Housing have had, normally for a residential development at the outset, and often even before a proposal is presented to the council, the developer will know how they're going to achieve the requirements, the affordable housing requirements of that development, and they will have a partner in that who they work with to ensure that it can be delivered on the site. That means that when the application comes to us, we have that information, we know what's being proposed, we know the percentages, and we can consult with our housing colleagues to ensure that that's deliverable. That is then included in a legal agreement, which is quite explicit and is quite easy to understand. What Mr. Blythe is explaining there is that there would be multiple options, so to speak, for the delivery of that. It's not impossible to do. We may have done that for other sites, but certainly that the preference is always to have a clear understanding of what is proposed in terms of the affordable housing requirement in the development plan, and how that would be achieved, which then ties through to the legal agreement. I don't know whether Housing want to make a brief comment on the legal agreement requirements, just so that you've got the full picture, Provost.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll bring you back in there, Susan.
Thank you, Provost. I think everything that Julie's said is absolutely spot on. The earlier that we get involved in discussions, the easier it becomes. And at the point further down the line, when we're trying to negotiate on an affordable option that the developer might not be able to afford, because it does involve them putting in a fair bit of subsidy. And our preference is always for the affordable housing to be delivered on that site. And it can be less than straightforward to undertake those negotiations sometimes. But I think the terms of the Section 75 would allow Housing, along with planning, to negotiate with the developer, and then it would be up to the developer to see whether they can comply with our requirements.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, convener.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor McCluckie. How are you thinking at this stage, sir?
Convener, elected members are always been keen to get social housing, and there's a need for it in Falkirk, and we all support that. And so does our officers in housing, as we've heard today, who seem to have tried hard with social landlords to try to deliver this proposal. However, it seems to be faltering, and it seems to be heading down the road as affordable housing because other avenues stopped. I could certainly make allowances for parking and other things because of the benefits to the community or the people of Falkirk in certain circumstances. But at the present moment, I've not got the assurances that an RSL would get on board, which is the best way to deliver it, and meets the funding and in different scenarios. And because that isn't in place as yet, after 4 years of discussion, then I'm no supporting the proposal at this stage. What I was trying to ask legal way, normally if a proposal was refused, they can come in with a free application within 6 months. But I was trying to remember, what is the position with an LRB? Is that would it mean a new application? That's just a supplementary question to do with that one.
You want to come in on that, Douglas?
As far as the appeal process, there is no appeal process from this forum. I think in terms of the free application, perhaps Julie might be able to give a bit more context to that.
Julie?
There are allowances whereby you can make a free go application for the same development, so it would have to be the same description, same applicant, and the same development proposals. Now there is another application which is currently being considered by the council for the same site. I'm just checking that they have a current application with the council whereby they're using their free go application. That's currently under consideration at the moment, application number P21 0574 full. So that current application that sits under consideration by the planning authority at the moment is using up their free go, so to speak.
Oh, thanks very much for that. I was just trying to see if the applicant managed to get somebody soon to move forward, but I'm happy with moving refusal on the grounds of doesn't look like it would go forward, and parking concerns and the fact that housing doesn't seem to meet the requirements at the moment for social housing.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kerr, you want to come in at this stage?
Thanks, Convener. I'm probably the same as Councillor McCluskey for refusal on officers' original recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to say at this stage that there's a lot been said on the housing situation, which is that there's no clear understanding on this proposal. But I'm also concerned in relation to the parking provision, and it states quite clearly that the proposed development does not meet the current standards in terms of the off-street parking provision. The proposed development causes a reduction of parking facilities for the community centre in Victoria Park, which we've seen quite clearly when we were there yesterday. So, Douglas, I think you've got the views, but I'll come back to Councillor Hughes just to see if he's happy that we've got a motion for Councillor McCluskey to refuse the application based on the grounds that he stated in relation to the no understanding really on the proposal for the housing, and also the issue about the off-street parking provision, which doesn't really meet the current standards and would put increased pressure on the surrounding area. This was seconded by Councillor Kerr, so I'm coming to you, Gordon, to see if you were happy with this.
Yes, having listened to Housing and to Julie Seidel, in terms of my supplementary question, Convener, when I said that I was looking for further clarification, I really am now more than ever now convinced that I would be moving to refusal of the application based on the issues of parking and a lack of understanding in relation to, sorry, Convener?
No, you're fine.
So I'm basically mirroring the views of Councillor Kerr and Councillor McCluskey.
Okay, then I'll go back to Mr. Blythe. Mr. Blythe, you've heard the members' views. There's a motion been moved and seconded. It's been a general agreement for Councillor Hughes and myself. It's in relation to the you can put the terminology down about there's no clear understanding in the proposal for the housing, and also the fact that there is concerns in relation to the proposed development, which will cause a reduction in parking for that community. So, I think has everybody agreed then? Mr. Blythe, you want to come back and maybe just sort of go over everything?
I think just to clarify then, Provost, I think what I'm hearing is that all members are minded to support the officer's original refusal reasons, namely the assessment of the application in terms of SGO 6, affordable housing, and policy HCO3, in terms that there's uncertainty around the ultimate delivery vehicle, and also that there are concerns about the parking standards have not been met, and the various policies that falls foul of in terms of the refusal reasons on page 207 of the original set of papers. So, in effect, endorsing the original refusal reasons given by the case officer.
Yep, I'm agreed. Has members agreed to that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Other than that, I'd just like to, for this first hearing, I'd like to thank everybody for coming here, and I'd like to take an opportunity just to say that the second hearing will take place in 15 minutes. Other than that, I would like to thank you all very much. Thank you. Well, welcome back to this Falkirk Council Planning Review Committee. Obviously, there are individuals here who weren't at the first hearing, so I'm going to go through the process from the beginning. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, the convener has directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. In accordance with Section 50 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, the public are excluded from this meeting, as it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be a real and substantial risk to public health due to infection or contamination with coronavirus. This meeting will be live streamed. First of all, on the agenda was apologies. We had apologies from the convener, Councillor Alexander, who has been unwell for some time now. Second is declaration of interest. So, for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time?
No, convener.
Okay, thank you. The minute of the meeting of the Planning Review Committee held on the 6th of December 2021, it's pages 3 to 5. And we've already agreed that, but we agreed that minute was fine. Thank you for that.
Agreed.
Thank you. That takes us now to item 6 on your agenda, which is the planning application P210046 full, erection of 9 dwelling houses with associated garages and engineering infrastructure at a site to the west of Castlewood Glen Road, Torwood. It's pages 49 to 597 on your agenda papers. Now, before we go into the debate, we'll ask our legal advisor, Mr. Douglas Blythe, to give us an outline on the procedures that will be followed on this item. Thank you, Mr. Blythe.
Thank you, Provost. I just wonder whether most of the parties present heard me going through this first thing this morning, but I'll try and summarise it as best I can for any new participants. This is a review of an officer's decision to refuse an application for a small housing development in Torwood. This comes before the review committee for consideration. It was before them, first of all, in November last year when they decided to conduct an unaccompanied site visit, which took place on Wednesday, and to hold a hearing on various specified matters which are outlined in the papers. The hearing and site visit are two of the three procedures that are available to the committee when trying to determine whether they have sufficient information upon which to make a decision. So the format for the hearing is a discussion-led process led by the committee with various participants, the applicant's agent, local residents, Mr. Shaw from the Council's Place Services, Planning and Environment Department, and a representative from Scottish Forestry as well. As no doubt you'll outline, Provost, there'll be an opportunity for parties to expand upon their hearing statements, or indeed to give their views based on the original submissions that were collated, and the participants will have a chance to talk to the committee for a period. There'll be an opportunity for questions, and for the applicant then to sum up. And at that point, the committee would then have to determine whether it was had sufficient information with which to make a decision, failing which they may ask for some further procedures. But that will come at the end of the hearing session. And as with any other planning determination that is before members, it has to be made in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations which suggest otherwise, and it involves assessing the correct policies, attaching weight to them, and arriving at a decision, as with any other planning decision that comes before members. So I'll hand back to you, Provost.
Thank you. First of all, I'll introduce the committee. I'm Councillor Buchanan, the Provost of Falkirk, and I'm the Deputy Convener of Planning. But as already said, the Convener of Planning, Councillor Alexander, unfortunately is not well on this occasion. We have other members of the committee, and I'll ask them to put their hands up. Councillor Gordon Hughes. Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Councillor James Kerr. Thank you, sir. And Councillor John McCluckie. Thank you. Now, just going to ask to make sure that everybody's here. We have a planning advisor here this morning, John Millen, who's the Senior Planning Officer. Is John here with us? John Millen? Fine. We also have Alistair Shaw, Development Planning Coordinator. Mr. Shaw? Fine, thank you, sir. We have also the applicant's agent, Roy Mitchell. Is there Roy Mitchell here? Thank you, sir. We also then have objectors, Mr. Gardner. Thank you, sir. And Joanna Stevenson.
Yeah.
We also have Barry Blackwood from Scottish Forestry. Is Barry here? That's fine. So everybody's here. So the first part of the procedure will for the planning advisor, Mr. John Millen, to give us a short summary of the application in front of us. Thank you, Mr. Millen.
Thank you, Provost. I intend to be brief in this summary, given the specific policy references, consultation responses and representations presented at the previous local review board sitting. This board seeks to review a detailed planning application for the erection of 9 detached dwelling houses with an associated garages and engineering infrastructure at a site to the west of Castlewood, Glen Road, Torwood, submitted on 2nd of February 2021. The application site extends to 2.57 hectares and consists of part of a woodland area, some of which had recently been cleared under a felling permission issued by Scottish Forestry. The site slopes upwards away from the adjacent Glen Road, which partly runs parallel to the application site. The application seeks planning permission to erect 9 large 4-bedroom detached dwelling houses served by 3 road access arrangements 2 from Glen Road directly, and 1 via a private roadway running at right angles to Glen Road. Proposed changes in levels would be required to facilitate the development, including the creation of building platforms. The application was refused planning permission on 25th of June 2021, with the report on handling setting out the considerations of the planning authority. The site has been visited by elected members on Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, and the matters subject to today's hearing are as page 55 of your supplementary information relating to 5 matters. 1. The impact of the proposed development on the existing surrounding area and clarification of the village boundary limit. 2. The impact of policies relating to housing in the countryside. 3. The formal and informal rights of way and access routes associated within and out with the development. 4. The impact of the proposed development on biodiversity, wildlife habitats, the deforestation, tree felling with reference to the constraints of the extant felling permission and the value and designation of the local woodland. And 5. The impact of the proposed development and open space. To examine these matters, a number of participants are available to address the inquiries of the board. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much for the summary, Mr. Milne. And as you say, members, the board did go out, and it was a very, very beneficial and very fruitful meeting on site. It's now an opportunity for the applicant's agent, Mr. Roy Mitchell, to give a summary of the application in front of us. It's in the report, as in page 556 on your agenda papers. Mr. Mitchell, you've got about 10 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost. Thank you, members and ladies and gentlemen. In my hearing response email dated 22nd of January 22, I commented on the 5 specified matters. The following is a condensed statement on each of the 5 specified matters. Item 1, Part A, the impact of the proposed development on the existing surrounding area, and Part B, and clarification on the village boundary limit. On Part A, Policy PE01 on placemaking is to ensure any proposed development is thoughtfully prepared and fits well with the existing surroundings. Unfortunately, the felling licence granted by Scottish Forestry to Callander Estates has resulted in a vast area of adjacent commercial woodland being removed. In my opinion, this has resulted in a major environmental impact already on the existing surrounding area. The proposed development can be part of the regeneration of the landscape at this northern end of the village. On Part B, on the clarification of the village boundary limit, the red outline boundary on the most current LDP2 documentation has not been updated for many years and does not encompass the physical boundaries of the actual approved, built and occupied, extant planning permissions at numerous locations within the village, which is misleading and does not inform a true indication of the settlement boundaries, as approved by members during the past 10 years. I've marked on the LDP red line settlement boundary these sites that I refer to, shaded in blue, which amounts to 13 dwellings, that the planning approvals are out with the council settlement policy document. If I could just put up this drawing, you can see there's a red line boundary and the shaded areas of blue for the 13 plots are all out with. There was 3 houses up at the top end, opposite the site in backland development. There was another one for Mr. Alan Milliken that I designed. There was the 2 parts. Michael Block has a house at Eonach There's the 3 plots that were approved between Byways and Eonach and there's the 4 houses down at Winderby Golf Course. All of these properties are out with the red line boundary, so it's misleading. On item 2, the impact of the policies relating to housing in the countryside. Policy PE14 countryside states that urban and village limits defined on the proposal's map represent the limit of expansion and settlements. Land out with these boundaries is designated countryside. Policy HC05, housing in the countryside, intimates that the general strategy is to direct new housing in rural areas to the existing villages in order to sustain their vitality and benefit from village services and infrastructure. And policy 8C02 is windfall sites. This states that housing development on sites within the urban and village limits, which are not identified as LDP proposals, will be supported if compliant with 4 points of specific design criteria, which in my opinion will be complied with. In this application, the delegated refusal recommendation by the planning officer was based primarily on non-compliance with the policies relating to housing in the countryside, in the officer's opinion. However, a recent planning application for 2 new dwellings located on Glen Road at the junction with the Castle Track was recommended for approval by the planning officer. The boundaries of the application for these plots were out with the LDP2 red line boundary and therefore contrary to the development plan. These 2 plots were approved and are currently under construction. This shows an inconsistency in the planning recommendation to members. Item 3, the formal and informal rights of way and access points associated with, within and out with the development. The Falkirk Council Core Paths Plan, adopted May 2010, identifies the recognised formal and signposted access from Glen Road to Torwood Castle, and then from the Castle Track to the Tapper Rock. These are the only 2 formal rights of way and pedestrian access located just out with the development boundaries, providing safe access into the Torwood woodland area. The unauthorised informal route into the site through the existing vegetation along the edge of Glen Road serves no materially beneficial purpose to the visiting general public and potentially is a dangerous road safety issue. There is no need to use this unauthorised informal route over private land when the designated core path is 100 metres away. Item 4, the impact of the proposed development on biodiversity, wildlife habitats and deforestation tree felling with reference to the extant felling permission and the value of the local woodland. I respectfully suggest that the impact on the biodiversity wildlife habitats has been created by the felling licence granted by Scottish Forestry to Callander Estates. The 252 acres of commercial woodland located to the southwest of the application site, now owned by Callander Estates, I understand is to be the subject of a 5 times 5 year felling programme over the next 25 years, dramatically changing the value of the local woodland and the environmental impact on the overall settlement. With regard to the tree felling that has taken place at the application site during the past 8 years, a company called RTS obtained a licence to fell part of the site and 20 odd additional acres in the woodland. Replanting was carried out within the Torwood, and the 10% area left unplanted was retained along part of the plot's frontage, agreed with the Forestry Commission. After this initial felling operation 7-8 years back, the applicant dug out all the tree roots and removed them off-site. So at that time, 3/4 of the application site was cleared of tree vegetation. 3 years ago, Callander Estates obtained a felling licence, of which part included the balance of the commercial woodland at the northern end of the application site. It has been mentioned in correspondence from Scottish Forestry that an obligation exists to replant this area by June 2022. The applicant's agreement with Callander Estates was that the replanting is in the woodland to the southwest, and again, this area of an application site remains clear. Finally, on a point of clarification, some of the objectors and also on Mr. Alistair Shaw's hearing response, they refer to the trees as ancient woodland. This is incorrect. On information drawings from Scottish Forestry and Scottish National Heritage, the woodland is referenced as a lipo, which is a long-established woodland of planting origin. And these are documents that the council have, which follow up, and it defines that there is no ancient woodland. Item 5, the impact of development on open space. Policy PE16 relates to protection of open space, where development will result in the loss of open space, and factually, the application site is not open space. but is designated as woodland on the Ordnance Survey base maps listed within the National Forest Inventory. Falkirk Council's consultation with Scottish Forestry received a response on this application, and they commented that if permission were to be granted, it would be expected to see compensatory planting equal to the total area required to facilitate the development and conditioned as part of the planning permission. I confirmed in my email response to the planning officer dated 17th of May 2021 that an area of compensatory planting equal to the extent of the proposed residential development would be provided, most likely over on the Blair's Farm adjacent to Clonbervie Golf Course on land within the applicant's ownership. In conclusion, the planning report and handling has assessed the proposal as contrary to the policies contained within the LDP2 and recommended refusal. I understand how the planning official in determining application is governed by the policy statements, primarily policy PE14 countryside and HCO5 housing in the countryside, which both limit the expansion of settlements to within the designated local development plan boundaries. There are numerous arguments and justifications to counter the reasons for refusal, together with official consultation responses that have no objection to the proposed development. However, the long and arduous task undertaken by the Council in the production of the policy documents requires the planning report to reflect this in the decision, and I recognise these policies are a fundamental part of that process. The appeal to the local review body planning process provides for this planning report to be questioned and highlights that interpretation of an alternative justification and point of view may be appropriate in certain situations. In conclusion, the circumstances affecting the visual landscape and environment currently on the ground are seriously impacted on the setting and approach into the village. In my opinion, it is not the development proposal that creates any visual disturbance to the setting, but many of the reasons for refusal are based upon this assessment strategy. Over the past 20 years, incremental growth has extended outwards along Glen Road, contributing policy, but it does not look out of place. It has its own character, and this proposal would mirror the existing housing, providing dual frontage to the edge of the 30 mph urban speed limit and finish off the last remaining part of infill development along the entire length of the Glen Road. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As you were on the first hearing just listening in, you will have an opportunity to come back once everybody's spoken, not to introduce any new material, but to answer any questions in relating to what has been said. So the next part of the process is, today is I'm going to ask the objector, Mr. Gardner, whose hearing statement is on page 579, to address the committee. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. You've got about 5 minutes, if more. We can take it.
Okay, thanks, Provost. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of points just regarding the submission by Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell indicated that the development of the two houses by local redevelopment at the junction of Castle Lane Glen Road was not included in the village plan and the LDP. The red line on that plan does show that area that was included, which was the previous caravan and old building that was in there. So that was included in that. So I don't think Mr. Mitchell's comment was correct there. And interestingly, he also mentioned that there seemed to be a lot of properties that exist in the village which were not within the official village boundary of the LDP, and that is quite a scary thing that's I guess been allowed to happen in the past. Now, I've made my submissions for the various matters which have been available for all the members on the meeting at the moment. I've read through previous to this call. I'd like to specifically focus my attention on matter 4, which is the impact of proposed development on the biodiversity, wildlife, habitats and deforestation initially. In general, the area of proposed development, it contains trees that are about 8 to 10 years old, and that's the only such area on the northern side of the upper woodland. This was the area that was felled a while back, but there's quite a lot of growth in that area, and I know you've been up visiting the site, I think you said on Wednesday, so you'll have seen that area yourself. The proposed removal of that current regenerating trees in the planned development area threatens not only the nesting environments for many woodland birds, but it also destroys the ground cover for many of the woodland smaller mammals, arachnids and insects and such like. But the main thing I want to focus on is the fact that Torwood is one of the only areas in the whole of Falkirk district that has a population of red squirrels. It's possibly the only one in the whole region. And in the section PE 19.3 of the Falkirk Local Development Plan, it states the following, and I'll just quickly read it. Development likely to have an adverse effect on European protected species has a species will only be permitted when an applicant can demonstrate that species license is likely. Red squirrels are included in Schedule 5 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. The removal of the trees in the proposed development area would reduce the habitat available for them, reducing the feeding opportunities and negatively impacting the red squirrel community. And how this relates to the application. My submission, which was for matter 4, I included a photograph of the location of an elm tree next to Glen Road, which is at the entrance to the path that goes through the woodland opposite Torrell property, which is through the development or proposed development area. On the 28th of May 2021, the photos I included there were taken on that date of a red squirrel feeding in that specific tree. It's vitally important that everything is done to support the small red squirrel population in the local woodland. So they need the support of the public, the local community and the planning department. And as the applicant himself states, or applicant's agent states many times in the submissions, there are ongoing commercial felling in the overall woods. So it makes it that much more of a priority that we help our endangered species. That relates to point 4. Do I still have a couple of minutes?
Yes, indeed, sir. Carry on.
Okay. My other comments relate to the applicant response document 3, and I'm just going to read a couple of statements that were made there and make my comments on them. Under section 4 public representation, there was a mention that the comments under headings A, B, C, D, E, F, G and H are all personal to the objectors who have used the same points of view against all the residential development applications that have been approved during the past 20 years. Now that statement is simply untrue. I haven't, for one. I don't believe for a minute that all residential development applications have had similar objections or points raised in that time. And the majority of previous applications were for single house development, nowhere near the scale and impact of the proposed development of the 9 houses plus garages. In section 6 planning assessment plan, local plan policies, the applicant states that the felling of the commercial woodland has resulted in the loss of woodland area, permanent landscape change and biodiversity issues. This was always a managed commercial woodland enterprise and involved replanting of all the felling areas. And secondly, the applicant highlights the issue relating to commercial felling. This actually supports the case for rejecting the planning application, as it raises the importance of ensuring that nothing else is done to further impact the biodiversity. PE 16, protection of open space. The applicant states it is the removal of commercial woodland which has adversely affected the character and appearance of the environment at this location. But it's actually his proposed development that will adversely affect the character and appearance of the environment at this location. PE 19, biodiversity and geodiversity, the applicant states, however, as stated numerous times through the above comments, which are his comments, the removal of the commercial woodland has severely impacted on the presence of wildlife species. So this statement really highlights the importance of preserving the existing environment and protecting the woodland species which have been already impacted. Policy PE 21.
Couple of minutes, sir. Couple of minutes. A couple of minutes yet.
All right, thanks. Promotion of forestry and woodland, PE 21. The applicant states, so this small residential development proposal is not the major factor in changing the environment. It is the removal of the commercial woodland. my statements, the commercial woodland felling above was always going to happen. They've already replanted the majority of the felled woodland, and the phased felling is combined with phased replanting, which ensures the habitat availability for those areas of woodland. And policy HC05, housing in the countryside, which is my final point to come back on. And the applicant states, the proposal could mirror the existing housing, removing the description of ribbon development and creating an attractive dual frontage gateway entrance to the village. I think very few people would find that the proposed development would be more attractive than the existing woodland environment. That's all my comments.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, sir. Now an opportunity for objector, Joanna Stevenson. Carry on, Joanna.
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you fine, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my objection was put in on behalf of members of Torwood Community Woodland Group. So my comments encompassed the comments and views of several people who live in Torwood on Glen Road. So it's not just my views, they're views of the community, if you like, representative of the community. So I agree with what Mr. Gardner has just said, that I find many of the comments that Mr. Mitchell has made on behalf of the applicant are completely wrong. They are not the views of the residents. The residents value the woodland, and the commercial felling, as Mr. Gardner said, was always going to take place. And the license by Scottish Forestry allows for some mixed replanting. So instead of it all being Sitka spruce, there will be some deciduous planting and more native woodland planting, and this will benefit the wildlife that has started to come back into the woodland around Torwood. So the land on which this proposed development is going to take place is woodland. There is no avoiding that and no getting away from it. And I just feel that the local residents of Torwood feel the woodland is an important part of the village, hence the name Torwood. There is a remnant of the ancient woodland, and part of Torwood's woodland is on the ancient woodland inventory. That is a fact, which my colleague from Scottish Forestry will be able to confirm. So there are remnants of ancient woodland, and the woodland over many years has been diminished. There's been, Mr. Mitchell has already said, various houses have been built, various businesses such as the fish farm have been allowed on the woodland. So the woodland has incrementally been shrunk over the last 20 so years. And therefore, I think it's very important that Falkirk Council continue to preserve what is left of the woodland, and indeed encourage maximisation of the woodland. The biodiversity which Mr. Gardner referred to, i.e. the red squirrels, there is also evidence of pine martens. Local residents have commented that since the replanting, there is more evidence of owls being heard and seen. So all of this is really, really important, and it's all part of the natural landscape and natural peaceful feature of Torwood. And the more housing that is allowed on the woodland, the more this is going to be denigrated. And this is just really not acceptable. It goes against what the general public is aware of, and certainly since the climate summit in Glasgow last year, there is importance on a national and international level to preserve and indeed increase our woodland areas. So I think Falkirk Council needs to bear that in mind. It's not just a local issue, it's a national issue. And therefore I would say that the planning office was correct to reject this planning application at the outset, as it clearly is in breach of numerous planning regulations. And on behalf of local residents, I would reinforce what Mr. Gardner has just said, and that the woodland needs to be protected, and that this planning application should not be entertained. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. Joanna, it's now an opportunity to go straight to our officer, Alistair Shaw, who's the Development Planning Coordinator, and his statement herein is on page 64 for members. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'll attempt to summarise the key points which try to address the areas of additional information that are set out in my hearing statement. Starting off with the village limit. So the Torwood village limit is defined in Falkirk LDP 2, and that's set out as the limit to the allowable expansion of the village with land out with that boundary designated as countryside. And at the northern end of the village, where the village limit follows the line of the Glen Road, enclosing the row of houses along the northeast side of the road. And then on the woodland, so that's within the urban limit, the village limit, and then the woodland on the southwest side of the road, which includes the application site.
Excuse me, Alistair, I'm sorry to interrupt you at this stage, but one of the members of the committee is having problems, and we need him to be hearing your assessment. He's a way to contact Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry, can you hear me? Ryan.
Yes, yeah, I can, Provost, yeah.
It's just to let you know that Councillor Kerrs has just informed that he chapped the door there just now and said that his computer is down. So I've given your phone number to phone you because it's important that he hears everything. We've got a very important issue in terms of the statement from Mr. Shaw. So what I'll need to do is I'll just need to hold off the meeting just now. Apologies for this with the technical difficulties, but the fact is that Councillor Kerr must be able to hear all the submissions before we come to any decision. So if members just take now, we'll take a 5-minute break and come back, and then we'll find out where he is from there. But it's unfortunate, but at the same time as we need openness and transparency, and we need Councillor Kerr to be aware and hear everything and every submission that's coming forward on this important matter. Okay, so you can have a break for 5 minutes. Thank you. Kerr, do you want to just do that just now, just to save any further interruptions? You want to just come up now? It'll only take you a few minutes, and because the phone isn't really advantageous when you're on such an important issue. So if you want to come up just now and share this computer, I'm quite happy with that.
Okay, Provost.
And then we'll restart the meeting in a few minutes. Thank you for bearing with us. Here in an office with me, if everybody's happy with that. Is everybody back in the call?
Yes.
Councillor Hughes, Councillor McCluckie, Alistair Shaw, there you are, Joanna, Mr. Gardner. Okay then, fine. Okay, we'll go straight back to you, Mr. Shaw, and if you want to maybe just start up again. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Provost. So I was just started with some reference to the village limit, which is one of the first matters the committee wanted further information on. So the Torwood village limit is defined in the Falkirk Local Development Plan 2, and as stated in the relevant policy, that's the limit to the allowable expansion of the village, with land out with that being defined as countryside. And the line of village limit is fairly clear in relation to the application site. So the village limit goes down the Glen Road, so to the northeast of the road, that's the existing row of houses that are within the village limit, and then the woodland to the southwest of the road, including the application site, falls out with the village limit. So the village limit was last reviewed through LDP 2, which was adopted in August 2020. There were no representations or objections in respect to the site or the line of the village limit in that vicinity during the process. The site has, however, been considered previously at the previous local development plan process. There was representation made in respect to the site, and that was considered at the LDP1 examination in 2015, and the site at that stage was rejected by the reporters who looked at it. They did not consider it to be an appropriate extension to the village, and they endorsed the current village limit. So successive local plans and LDPs have looked at the village limit, and they've provided appropriate opportunities for growth. So the village limit is facilitating adequate plan growth, the need for further outward expansion. Just looking at the issue of impact on the surrounding area, the site is a substantial one. I've calculated it as around 20% of the existing village footprint. It's a long frontage with Glen Road, 200 metres, extends 100 metres back into the woodland. I think also critically, it's, as we've heard, it slopes up into the woodland, and with the houses set some 40 metres back from the road, you know, the level of the houses, the finished floor level of the houses will be quite substantially above the road, about 4 or 5 metres. So all that means that, you know, it will have a significant adverse impact on the visual amenity and setting of the village. I think the other observation that I've made is that the form of the development as proposed is kind of out of character with most of the existing development along the Glen Road, where the houses are typically clustered closer to the road and at a lower elevation. And some of these considerations were influenced the reporter's view in that LDP1 examination that I referred to. Looking at the policies related to housing in the countryside, so that's policy 205, and that sets out circumstances.
You're breaking up, Alistair. Could you maybe get clearer on the microphone? You're breaking up a bit.
Right. I'll speak a bit slower as well.
That's fine.
So policy 205 sets out the circumstances in which housing in the countryside could be supported. And there's 6 criteria, and none of the criteria can be applied to this application. None of them qualify. In terms looking at rights of way, informal and formal, so there's 2 core paths in the vicinity of the application site. One that runs up the Castle Lone, the road to the track to Torwood Castle, and another one that goes up off that road to Tappick Broch through the woodland. So those are 2 core paths. Those aren't directly impeded by the application site. There's one other, from inspection side, there's one other informal path that leads through the woodland from Glen Road. That's not a core path or an established right of way to my knowledge. One observation I would make is that there is a policy PE13 on the green and blue network in the local development plan that states that new development should contribute to the green and blue network where appropriate through enabling opportunities for green and blue network improvement on adjacent land. And I think if in the event that the committee did decide that permission was to be granted, I think a contribution to the upgrading of the path network in the vicinity of the site should be sought. In relation to forestry and woodland, notwithstanding what Mr. Mitchell says, certainly in my records, it is on Nature Scots. The woodland is in Nature Scots inventory of ancient woodland, being of the long established plantation origin type. And that's in recognition of how long the area has been continuously wooded for at least 150 years. And I think it's important to note that on such sites, it's not just the tree cover that's of value, but the woodland soils and the seed bank that are there that have built up over many, many years. And it remains ancient woodland even if the trees are felled. The woodland will regenerate over time, and indeed it started to do so. In relation to biodiversity and wildlife, we've already heard from Mr. Gardner on that, and I would concur that with the view that there is species recorded and reported within the woodland. Our rangers state that red squirrel, pine marten, and nesting birds of prey have been recorded. So there are potential substantial impacts on biodiversity which need to be investigated. No ecological surveys or impact assessments have been provided as part of the application. And finally, on open space, the Torwood woodland is included as an open space in the council's open space strategy. Woodland to which the public have access acts as open space, can provide all those functions that open space does. So it's certainly an open space strategy I would see as important in the open space strategy.
You're breaking up again, Alistair.
Sorry. So it's there is an action in the open space strategy to improve the quality of the Torwood, exploring opportunities for woodland management and development of the outdoor access network around the village. And I think the development of the application site would have undoubtedly have an impact on the woodlands relationship with the village and on the visual amenity of the woodland. And that's my summary of the areas of information requested.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. You'll obviously know that there'll be an opportunity for members to come back and ask any questions during that period. And also there'll be an opportunity for the applicant's agent, Mr. Mitchell, to come back in relation to anything that's been said already by either officers or the objectors. But at this stage, Barry Blackwood, Scottish Forestry. Barry, would you like to give us some input?
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon all. Just like to say I've had no prior involvement with the application, but was asked to stand in for colleagues who were unable to attend. I am, however, the Woodland Officer for Falkirk and able to speak on behalf of Scottish Forestry at this hearing. I understand Scottish Forestry has not submitted a hearing statement, but I'll be speaking to the effect of our original consultation response, which was submitted to Falkirk Council on the 12th of March 2021. For anyone not aware, Scottish Forestry is an executive agency of Scottish Government and was formed on the 1st of April 2019 to take over responsibilities of Forestry Commission Scotland as part of the final devolution of forestry to Scottish Government. The main issue of concern to Scottish Forestry in relation to the development planning is that of deforestation and the potential effects it could have on ecology and landscape of local and wider environments. Scottish Planning Policy Paragraph 218 issued by Scottish Government refers to the control of woodland removal policy, which seeks to protect the existing forest resource in Scotland and supports woodland removal only where it would achieve significant and clearly defined additional public benefits. A proposal for compensated planting may form part of this determination. Excuse me. The Planning Scotland Act 2019 also places the responsibility on local authorities to identify how it will protect, enhance and improve the resilience of its woodlands, and this should be at the forefront of one's mind when making planning decisions that could reduce or detrimentally affect the woodland extent within a local authority area of responsibility. With regard to this application, our concerns are as follows. The area proposed for development resides entirely within woodland. This proposal to change land use from that of a woodland to another development would be considered deforestation under the Environmental Impact Assessment Forestry Scotland legislation, and therefore must be screened accordingly. Where deforestation is proposed as part of a development, the Scottish Government's control of woodland removal policy would apply, and where planning permission is granted, suitable planning conditions to deliver compensation of any woodland removal must be applied. Part of the development area, extending to 0.66 hectares, is covered under felling permission FPA 6718, which was granted by Scottish Forestry on the 13th of December 2019. Though this gave permission for a portion of the woodland to be felled, it also placed a legal obligation on the landowner to replant the same area with a mixture of conifers and broadleaves by 30th of June 2022. The supporting planning statement makes no mention of the legal restog obligation and nothing of the additional felling of woodland that would be required to enable the development. Additionally, in relation to the applicant's agent, Mr. Mitchell's submission, I'd like to respond on 3 points. On adjacent tree felling within Callander Estate, this relates to normal and sustainable forest management with an improved programme of tree felling and replanting, which has a positive effect on carbon sequestration, carbon stocks, sinks, and will contribute to climate change mitigation as a source of renewable energy and sustainable wood products. Mr. Mitchell stated that the application area does not reside within ancient woodland. This is incorrect. Mr. Mitchell stated that the woodland is LIPO, which is correct. However, LIPO is one of two types of ancient woodland and is of long-established plantation origin rather than of semi-natural establishment. The Ancient Woodland Inventory, which records ancient woodland, defines this as land which has been continually wooded since at least 1750. And I am in agreement with the comments made by Joanna Stevenson and Alistair Shaw relating to this point. Finally, I may be mistaken, but I believe Mr. Mitchell stated that the felling permission FPA 6718 was agreed to be planted elsewhere. This is not the case. The replanting is legally obliged to be undertaken within the development area. That's my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, sir. I'm going to go back to Mr. Mitchell in relation to everything that's been said by both the planning advisor, the objectors, Mr. Shaw, and also Mr. Blackwood. But before I go back to, I would just like to go back to Mr. Millen, just for a point of clarification, because obviously being out in sight yesterday was very fortuitous, and we took a walk down where this two houses are getting built at the moment. Now, the fact of the matter is that it was, I think it was stated by Mr. Gardner that that area where the houses were getting built, just ask if I'm correct, Mr. Gardner, you said it was in the red zone.
Yeah, the plan shows a little red line that comes round that bit.
Yeah. Well, I asked this morning to get a copy of the decision notice that was taken. It says that the proposed, and I'm sure that Mr. Millen will tell us, the proposed development is contrary to the development plan. However, material considerations in the form of the site circumstances and high quality of design are considered sufficient to outweigh the development plan in this instance. Now, Mr. Millen sitting there is a senior planning officer, and Mr. Millen did outline when it was asked the question about the red line zone. Mr. Millen did tell us, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth because I'm going to ask him to say, because it is an important issue, that small part of the site was out with, and that's how it came to committee, because it was not a part of the development plan site. So, Mr. Millen, would just like to give us your views on this issue, because I think it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. At the outset, I'll say I wasn't the case officer for that particular application, but my understanding is the application you refer to is P//21/0206/FUL, which was brought to Planning Committee, I believe, in August 2021. And the reason for the application being brought to Planning Committee was that while I think one of the representatives has stated the site was formerly occupied by a number of sheds and a small caravan, that element of the site was within the red line boundary of the development plan. An application came in to replace those sheds with two dwelling houses. But as part of that application, the garden area for those two dwelling houses extended beyond the red line boundary of the development plan area. So my understanding is it was the garden area of those two dwelling houses that went beyond the red line boundary of the settlement. And as such, it could have been construed that because the garden area had gone beyond the red line boundary, the application may have been considered potentially contrary to development plan. And it was for that reason that officers brought that application to the attention of elected members in August. But my understanding is the two houses themselves were within the red line boundary of Torwood. It was the garden area that had crept out beyond that boundary. I hope that answered your question, Provost.
It does, and I think it's an important part, because obviously the agent, Mr. Mitchell, maybe have come back in that, but obviously because we were out there yesterday and you had actually told us that, I think it's important just to clarify exactly where we are, because the red line is quite an important aspect in the whole of this hearing. Okay, I'm going back to Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, you've heard the planning advisor, Mr. Millen. You've heard from the objector, Mr. Gardner and Joanna Stevenson. You've heard from Alistair Shaw, Development Planning Coordinator. You've heard from Barry Blackwood, Scottish Forestry. So there are a number of areas in here, and obviously you've been taking notes. So you have an opportunity to come back and question any of these issues, but at the same time, you don't introduce anything new to your application. Okay, I know that might be difficult, but it's that's the way it is. Okay, Mr. Mitchell, carry on.
Thank you, Provost. Just quickly on that point for the two plots at the bottom of the Castle Track onto Glen Road, the application boundary is more than double the size of the area formerly occupied by the old stone building and the caravan. So that's where that point comes, where I stated that it was out with the application boundary, the red line village boundary. If I can start with Mr. Shaw's representation in his comments. Mr. Shaw started by saying that the village limit is defined in the LDP2. That is the extent of the village. I've shown that that is categorically wrong. We are in a situation where we have the three houses at the back of the houses opposite are out with the red line. Alan Milliken's bungalow is out with the red line. The three plots between Byways and Aonic Moor, which are an extant planning permission, are out with the red line boundary. The two houses built in the rear of Michael Block's house are out with the red line boundary. And the four houses approved at Glenbervie are out with the red line boundary. That's why I showed that picture of that map. All these blue areas are out with the red line village boundary. That plan has not really been updated since the local plan days. And the LDP1 had changes, and there's over 10 years of approvals on that plan that have not been incorporated in that red line boundary. And that could have been done at the last LDP. Mr. Shaw then went on to go state about 20% of the existing village footprint is within this application. If you took all of these sites that are shaded in blue and put the red line round that boundary, it comes down to 10.78% of the village boundary. So again, that information is incorrect. And also in Mr. Shaw's representation, he says the hearing statement intimated there are two sites, H51 and H52, currently being developed for a total of 25 homes. The planning approvals and under construction are 24 homes on the former Torwood School, and there's 11 houses in the McLaren Park. So that's 35 houses, not 25. On the impact of the sound surrounding area, the hearing statement advises that again, this is wrong, misleading, I've covered that. Policies relating to housing in the countryside. Mr. Shaw says that HCO5 is not satisfied. The hearing statement only states that the relevant policy in LDP2 is HCO5, housing in the countryside. Intimates that the general strategy is to direct new housing in rural areas to the existing villages in order to sustain their vitality and benefit from village services and infrastructure. This consideration is totally disregarded in the hearing statement, and then it goes on to refer to the reporter's comment in LDP1 that this proposed development would constitute ribbon development. Mr. Shaw stated that the proposal is out of character. It's not, the existing developments are closer to the road, and this is what influenced the reporter's decision in arriving at that decision. This design was never prepared when the reporter arrived at that decision on LDP1. So the reporter didn't have any factual information to arrive at that conclusion. So again, that is wrong. The existing houses on the opposite side of Glen Road is the ribbon development that extended the 30 miles per hour speed limit out to the edge of the settlement. The new proposal is reflecting the scale, the density and the character of the existing houses opposite and does not extend beyond the village 30-mile speed limit. Due consideration could be applied to policy HCO2 on windfall housing which allows development on sites within the urban and village limits which are not identified on the LDP2 proposal. On the informal and formal rights of way, Mr. Shaw's comments are correct about the two code paths. They're recognised. They are out with the boundaries, so they are not really being affected by the proposed development, but they're adjacent, quite close proximity. And acknowledge that the informal access opposite Torrell Tordeen does not have on the legal agreement of the landowner. It's situated in a dangerous position with anyone egressing this location potentially directly into the pathway of motor vehicles on Glen Road. It's stated on the Green and Blue Network comments in here statement, a positive comment states, in the event of permission being granted for the proposal, a contribution to the upgrading the path network in the vicinity of the site could be sought. I agree this would be beneficial if the contribution was spent on the core path leading up to the Tapach Broch. It needs some work done on it. There's been some work done there where you've got edging slabs, but it still needs money spent on it. And it would make it more, improved work would make it more accessible for older and visitors to visit the Tapach Broch. An amount per dwelling could be imposed, say £1,500 each. It could also be part of the Section 75 agreement if planning permission was to be granted. On the impact and on forestry and woodland, Mr. Shaw still goes on and states that it is ancient woodland, and that is what is on the maps. Well, this map here, which is the Forestry Commission map, and it says ancient woodland is in orange. There is no orange on there. The LIPO, the long-established woodland of plantation origin is yellow. All of that area with the site is all yellow on the Scottish forestry map. On the SNH map, the ancient woodland is green. There is no green in the application area. It is, on this one, is long established for plantation orange. So that's where I get my factual information from, where I can test where Mr. Blackwood from the Scottish Forestry and Mr. Shaw say it's ancient woodland. Someone has to have the right information. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But this is information I've got off the internet. The impact on biodiversity and wildlife habitats. What we had there was a situation where the felling has had an impact on the biodiversity and wildlife, and it has moved the wildlife further into the woodland, as you would expect, and it will probably move further in when there's more felling. Mr. Shaw said that it didn't provide an ecological report, but through the consultation with the planning officer during the project, on read by an email 29th of April 2021, it states, as things currently stand, the application would be recommended for refusal primarily on policy grounds. Given the planning policy issues, your client may wish to take a view on whether to incur additional costs on instructing specialist reports. And I went back and confirmed that, depending on the outcome, could it be conditioned that we would do these reports. That basically addresses the issues on Mr. Shaw's comments. Mr. Gardner, we've covered that one. He stated I was wrong regarding the LDP red line boundaries, but these two do encroach out with. 8 to 10 years ago, the initial tree felling on the application site, when RTS carried out that work, they left the tree stumps in the ground. The applicant went onto the site after that. We spent many months ripping out all the tree roots and taking them off site. And at that point, then everything was left clear. The vegetation that's on the site just now, some fir trees, which are self-seeded, and they're 7-year-old maximum. But they're not evenly spaced out, so we would have to do major work on there, and replanting would take place. Regarding the wildlife, the red squirrels, I acknowledge that there was a picture shown. There was a red squirrel down in the yew tree. But in general, the red squirrels, the pine martens, the nesting birds, with all the tree felling, would have moved in a safer environment further into the woodland. The woodland behind the application site is 252 acres. There's another 250 acres on the south side of the Castle Track. So there's a huge area of woodland for the wildlife habitat. Yes, on the area that was owned by the applicant previously when he sold it to Callendar Estates, that's where Callendar Estates advised that there was going to be five-year plans, take the 25-year felling. And the principle of that was to remove the commercial woodland and replace it with broadleaf planting, which would be there for generations. Mr. Garden stuff. Joanne Stevenson, the Torwood Woodland Group. The commercial felling was always going to take place, and they acknowledge it's probably happening over the next 25 years. But I've met with arboriculturists up in the woodland, and they've told me that that woodland should have been felled over 25 years back, because it's struggling then to get machinery in to do it properly. The woodland is not indicated on the Forestry Commission and SHH maps as ancient, it is illegal. Biodiversity has been affected by the large-scale tree felling operations by Callendar Estates. Wildlife will have moved further into the woodland. The existing natural landscape has definitely changed due to the felling and will take many years to recover. It is not the proposed housing that would change the environment, in my opinion. It is the felling by Callendar Estates. Mr. Blackwood, the original consultation response, deforestation has an effect on the wildlife. I agree that's the situation with the trees that have been felled. I still think that the wildlife would have moved into the woodland. I'm not an ecologist, but I would have taken that view that I think that was the sensible route, that they wouldn't come towards the road, but more protected species. The concerns that reside entirely within the woodland, the deforestation you've referred to in your consultation that compensatory planting elsewhere would be an acceptable solution. The planning permission was to be granted, and I confirmed that that would be an acceptable route to go. And the applicant owns 200 acres down at the Blairs, adjacent to the Limberley Golf Course. There is ancient woodland down at Wallace Bank at the golf course, and planting the equivalent area of the development site as compensatory planting adjacent to that was a proposal that I put to Brenda. And you said about the replanting, and my statement was wrong. The applicant was the owner of the land who commissioned with RTS 8 years ago, who made an application for a felling license on his behalf, was done on the understanding that the replacement planting would be done within the additional felling within the Torwood, and the Forest Commission's rules allow 10% to be left vacant. And that was agreed that that would be the area that was left vacant where the application housing is proposed. I spoke to Harry Wilson of RTS 2 weeks ago, and he confirmed that is actually the factual agreement. That's what happened. The applicant also told me that he had meetings with Guy Wedderburn of Callendar Estates, and it was 5 years back. I prepared a title plan where we transferred the 252 acres to Callendar Estates, but all the commercial felling of the woodland was going to be undertaken by them, and the small area of woodland that was retained at the northern end of the application site, Callendar Estates removed that. They made the felling application for that along with their woodland within the area they acquired, and as part of that agreement with the applicant, they agreed that 10% area that could be left vacant would be done on the site. So that is his understanding. It's definitely what RTS agreed with me. I haven't spoken to Callendar Estates, but I have to take that information as factual from both of these parties. I'm sorry, of Mr. Gardner. Did I respond to Mr. Gardner's comments? I did. Thank you very much, Provost.
You're muted, Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Blythe. Okay, thank you very much. You had an opportunity there to respond to everything that was being said. We now have an opportunity now to bring in members. Could I say at the very outset that the maps that you showed, Mr. Mitchell, I would concur with the fact, because I've been a councillor for 30 years and probably been on the planning for a long number of years, a convener for nearly 10 years, and we've visited Torwood on so many occasions, and I would be one that would be responsible for many of these applications that you showed us on the blue. I think the last one was, I don't think we were at McLaren Park, we might have been, but we were down at the Glenbervie for what they classified as an enabling development at that time, to ensure that the golf course would continue because of the problems with finance. Anyway, I'm going to open it up for members. I'm going to come right away to Councillor Hughes, then Councillor McCluskey and Councillor Kerr for initial questions. Okay, Councillor Hughes. Hi, you're mute, Gordon.
Thank you, convener.
No
Obviously, I would like to ask Mr. Mitchell, through yourself, convener, a couple of questions. We've heard that there were in 2015 and in 2020, obviously, consideration of the local development plan. And in 2015, I mean, I obviously wasn't there, so I'm assuming that it was in fact an inquiry at the local development plan, which involved reporters. Can I ask you, in 2015, under the local development plan process, did you make any submissions to the local development plan in relation to the site that you're asking to be developed today?
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Yes, I did make representations to the 2015 LDP one, and that was information that Mr. Shaw said that was discussed with the reporter, and he decided that it was out with the village boundaries, and his actual comment stated that the existing character of the development in Glen Road, with the housing being close to the frontage, different from what I'm proposing now, in the opinion of the reporter, wasn't acceptable. And I've come back and I said to you that the situation with that was, I only produced this design 18 months ago. So the reporter didn't have any, it was just a red line as an application putting forward a proposal for development to extend Glen Road up to the village boundary. No detailed design whatsoever for a reporter to comment on. So,
yeah, but what I'm thinking is that obviously, Mr. Mitchell, the reporter made a designation in 2015. In 2020, in terms of the local development plan, did you make any representations when the 2020 development plan was being finalised?
I didn't, on the basis that I've done numerous representations to the council and various councils over the years, and it goes through the process, and similar comments have come back on all my areas of land that I've proposed in Torwood over the last 15 years. And I get thrown at me that it's countryside, it's against policy, and these are the rules, and you're not getting to adjust it. So I knew if I put something in, I was getting the same response back that I had on the 2015 one. The only way to take that forward, as I've done on other sites, is to make a detailed planning application and try and debate it with the officers. But if the officers stick to the policy grounds that the boundaries are set in the LDP, they have to recommend refusal. Then I take it to a local review body for an appeal. It's simply so it's not just an individual's opinion, it comes down to the members so they can address it and see is there a valid point of view being put across.
Right,
That's
thank
the
you,
reason.
Mr. Mitchell. I wanted to clarify with yourself on page 557 and 558 and 557. Now, obviously, in relation to your development, are you considering that your proposed development would be considered, if it was passed, an infill development?
If I was just taking an area of ground as a development proposal and trying to consider the factual information that is in the policies, it would have been classed, if it was on its own, in the situation that we've got the 9 houses opposite, if that had been the application, that would have been classed as ribbon development. And it would have been an argument and a justification to say why that should be rejected. But because that 9 housing, and they were built incrementally, and I was involved in some of them over the years, and they were constructed, occupied, changed hands, but they extended the 30-mile speed limit up to the northern end of the village. That then left this area of ground. Now, it can't be classed as an infill between the 2 houses that are currently being built at the bottom of Castle Track and the 30-mile limit, because it's not between properties. So that would be an extension of the village. But the extension of the village was already formed by the 9 units that have been built, most of them over the last 10, 12-year period. And so what I was saying was, I don't class it as an infill and I don't class it as a ribbon development. I just class it that there's an opportunity here to reflect development up to the extent of the village boundary, the speed limit being the village boundary, and it's mirroring the area of the development. Now, over the years, with Falkirk Council roads officials, Finlay Brown used to be the head of roads, and numerous times Finlay Brown told me you should have double-sided road development. That slows down traffic. Visually, the motorist is aware that it's a built-up area and it slows down. That's part of my argument as well, why it should be double-sided development.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Can I ask you also, and obviously in terms of your submissions, because obviously I haven't seen all of them, did you have a biodiversity report created for your submission in terms of your development or proposed development?
I did not, Mr. Hughes. What happened was DE19 biodiversity and geodiversity, it has not been demonstrated through submission of a habitat and protected species survey that the proposed development would protect and enhance habitats and species of importance. In Brent Vivian's email, as we were processing the application, there was also one on landscape, and Brent Vivian sent me this email on the 29th of April 2021 stating, as things currently stand, the application would be recommended for refusal primarily on policy grounds. There was consultations that come back in. The Roads Department consultation was supportive. Environmental health, there was numerous consultations come back in. Education, everybody was supportive. But on these ones, it was primarily on policy grounds. Given the planning policy issues, your client may wish to take a view on whether to incur costs on instructing specialist reports, because the recommendation going forward was refusal. I went back to Brent and I said, happy if that was a condition to be imposed, that we would have to provide that. And an ecologist would provide a report on the biodiversity and wildlife. And hopefully they would concur with me that with the felling of the woodland, I was up there recently, and the parts nearest to Glen Road, you couldn't even hear birds whistling. I didn't see any red squirrels or pingman. I'm not suggesting that they're not there. What I'm suggesting is that it's when the woodland is felled, the wildlife will go into a safer environment and go deeper into the existing forest.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Convener, can I ask questions of other representatives? Convener, you're muted.
We all make that mistake, Gordon. Just to say at this stage, Mr. Garden, you've got your hand up, but you have no opportunity to come back in and ask any questions and take part in the debate. This is purely for members now. You've already had your opportunity. Councillor, with all due respect, Councillor Hughes, you can ask questions to anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I wanted some clarification, if I may ask Mr. Shaw some questions in relation to the proposed development. Can I ask you, in terms of policy at the moment, and I'm looking at Mr. Mitchell's proposed development of 9 houses. If 9 houses were to go ahead, those 9 houses would not be subject to any contributions. Is that the case?
If the committee was minded to grant planning permission, I think we would be certainly looking for contributions, and those would be calculated according to the relevant guidance and the supplementary guidance. I think there's probably an inclusion of some information on that in the consultation responses to the application.
There is indeed.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to, because I know that in general policy, that I think that planning basically does have, shall we say, it is supportive of small developments in general within, obviously within the settlement area, if I call it, within the urban line. And that was why I asked that in terms of small developments, that they may not be subject to contributions, and for there to be education or health or whatever.
But you're correct, Councillor Hughes, in that there are thresholds for the various types of contributions. So I think education, I think, is 4 units. I think open space is now 10. Healthcare contributions is 50. So yeah, you're right. There are smaller developments sometimes do benefit from that, from those thresholds.
So, in terms of infill development, Mr. Shaw, this development, could you explain the difference between infill development as it would apply within urban settlement, and conversely, how an infill development would look in terms of countryside development?
Well, we have a very in our policy on housing in the countryside, there is specific mention of infill, and in our supplementary guidance that goes along with that SG01, that is very quite strictly defined. In other words, there's 2 different types. There's kind of linear infill that's on a road that's between 2 residential properties, and then there's clusters. So, and there are diagrams in the guidance showing what can be added to a cluster as infill. Basically, it has to be surrounded on 3 sides with existing development. So the concept of infill in countryside terms is set out quite explicitly in the guidance. Infill within the urban limit is just a kind of common sense understanding of it. Infill, it's within a gap site within the urban fabric, basically.
Right. So basically, if this site was classified as being within the countryside, then this development would fall.
That's correct. Correct. It wouldn't fulfil that the criteria for infill development.
Right. And if it was classified within the urban settlement area, would there be any considerations for this site?
Well, if it was within the village limit or the urban limit, it would different policies would apply. So it would be, Mr. Mitchell mentioned HCO3, which is windfall housing. That's specifically a policy that relates to sites within the urban or village limits. So that would apply. If the site was within the village limit, that would be the policy that would apply.
But can I ask you finally that in terms of the urban limit in relation to the to Torwood Village, that this site in relation to the local development plan as set out in August 2020 would in fact fall out with the urban settlement?
Yes, it's out with the village limit, yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Convener, I'm just having a wee asking questions of everybody, if that's okay.
That's what we're here for.
Right. I noticed that Mr. Gardner had his hand up and was obviously itching to get back in, if I can use that phrase. Mr. Gardner, you're obviously very, shall we say, enthusiastic about about environmental issues. And obviously you mentioned and you took photographs of red squirrels. Can you generally give me an impression on the extent of the foraging and the level of, shall we say, habitat of the red squirrel?
Yes, Mr. Hughes. It depends whether your question is relating in general to the habitat of red squirrels in the country or specifically to the habitat of red squirrels in the local environment.
I'm looking at the local environment.
Yeah, well, the reason I included the photograph, which was taken less than a year ago, right down at the front of the proposed development area, was to show a part of the living area for the red squirrel population in Torwood Woods. There's both grey squirrels and red squirrels in our local area. The red squirrels can be seen depending on which parts of the woods you go to at different times of year, but they have a reliance on different types of vegetation and habitat. And there's not only just a reliance on the pine cones that are available a lot of the time high up in the trees, but some parts of the year they rely on other types of more native woodland to get what they require to survive. And the fact that some of the area of woodland near the proposed development has been cleared has not sent that wildlife to other parts of the woods. They continue to come down to that part. They've got a reliance on that for certain times of the year, and people still see these red squirrels in that part.
Just finally, Mr. Gardner, I really don't know much about biodiversity per se or red squirrels, but would I be right in suggesting that the red squirrel is a protected species, whereas the grey squirrel isn't?
Yeah, the red squirrel is native to Scotland, and the grey squirrels sadly were introduced a long time ago, and the grey squirrels are a big threat to reds due to, not in this area, they don't carry squirrel pox in this area, but they outfight, outbattle, out-eat the red squirrel population. So grey squirrels are a bit of a challenge for that. But I would say that replanting a forested area down near Blair Farm is going to be of no benefit to the Torwood red squirrels because it's too far away. The Torwood red squirrels require woodland that's in Torwood and not woodland that's a mile and a half away from us.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was looking at the lady who spoke earlier and I've forgotten your name. Apologies for that.
It's Joanna.
Sorry, Joanna. My apologies for for that. You were mentioning that you're a member of an environmental group. Is this Urban Woodland?
It's a community woodland group.
Right, community woodland. And in relation to, does your organisation look at all planning applications in relation to the environment?
Yes, we've been involved in quite a number of planning applications over many years, certainly almost 20 years now that we've been in operation. So we've been involved in most of the planning applications in and around the woodland in Torwood.
And obviously, in relation to planning applications, you obviously know quite a bit about the biodiversity of the area as well.
Yes.
And in terms of your submissions, over the years, in your experience, has the likes of the red squirrels or the pine martens, or are they in abundance?
Do you mean previously or currently?
Well, from previously up to now.
Red squirrels, as far as I'm aware, have only recently been noted in Torwood. My son, who lives in Torwood, saw a red squirrel maybe 3 years ago for the first time, and has seen evidence that there are pine martens as well in the woodland. Historically, the woodland in Torwood was home particularly to many owls, birds of prey, obviously deer, fox, etc. So in terms of red squirrels specifically, I think they have been a more recent observation. My colleague Andy Gardner might be able to add to that, but I think they are a more recent observation in the woodland and a very welcome one.
Yeah. So although mention of red squirrels, there has been evidence of other wildlife over many years.
Yes, the people of Torwood village, going back into the 50s and 60s, were locally called houlets, which is the French word for owls, because of the number of owls that roosted in Torwood. So that's an example. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I promise I won't forget your name.
That's okay.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Blackwood, in terms of the Scottish Forest, your agency obviously has an overview of woodlands in obviously in the whole of Scotland. And do you have, in terms of your overall view, do you have a management responsibility in dealing with agents and also landowners in relation to the development of their woodland?
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Yes, we do. We're kind of, especially as a woodland officer, I'm kind of at the coalface of dealing with land owners and land managers and kind of applications and in the management of the forests, which we regulate for Scottish Government.
And is it your view, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but in the main, are woodland areas usually within the countryside?
It's an interesting question. I think if you look back in time, the vast majority of the whole country was wooded, and where we've come to through hundreds of years of development for settlement, for agriculture, mining, we have what woodland we have left. But woodland cover in the UK is, I think, around 13%, and it's one of the lowest of all countries in Europe. So not necessarily in the countryside, because we have urban woodlands.
Yes.
But at one point it would have all been woodland, pretty much.
Yes, but you do have can I ask just one final question? That you
Certainly.
do have a responsibility for the conservation of woodland.
Yes, yeah. So we regulate the forestry industry and kind of protect and enhance the woodland resource we have for the people of Scotland.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, convener.
No, thank you, Councillor Hughes, for your input. That was much appreciated. A lot of reasonable questions there. Before I bring in the other two councillors, I would just like to ask a couple of questions myself, because of the fact is it was brought up at the site visit in relation to that application for the two houses. And you yourself, Councillor Hughes, had been asking Joanna and Mr Gardner if in relation to other applications that came forward. To both of you, Mr Gardner first, this application that was granted for the two houses, although it isn't really pertinent to this application, but it is really in terms of what we're talking about, the thin red line or whatever you want to call it. Did you object to that application, or was you given an opportunity in relation to that, knowing it was outside the local development plan?
Well, as I stated earlier on, Provost, my understanding was that was within the development plan because it showed the red line on the plan anyway, and the expectation was that would potentially be an area where there would be a build that took place. So I didn't submit anything because until earlier on in this call, when somebody highlighted that there was this extra area that was extended, I wasn't aware that it was out with the village development plan.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'll go to Joanna. Joanna, did your group put any questions in, because it's on the frontage, and it's a relevant question because we're dealing with every aspect. We've got to scrutinise these applications when it comes to an LRB. We've got to heavily scrutinise them. So any questions that comes in that can give members more information. So I'm asking you, did your group put any submissions in against this application for these two houses, which is only maybe a few metres for the boundary of this new application that's in at the moment?
No, we didn't, for the same reasons that we looked at the plan and we saw that it was within the red line.
Okay.
That was our understanding.
That's perfect. Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to go, before I bring in, I'm going to go right to the agent, Mr Mitchell. I'm going to go there yourself because there's not much being spoke about in relation to the road problems and the speed of the cars and the heavy volume. People wouldn't realise, unless you lived in Torwood or maybe doing business there, how busy that road can be. So what I'm saying to you is, when we were out in sight as well, we were stepping off and stepping on to make sure that some of these vehicles which were travelling, and they weren't travelling during this 30-mile limit. I'm asking you in relation to the issue about entrances to this proposed development. Can you maybe give us a wee bit of information on that? Because it was sort of mentioned by our planning officer in relation to the accesses proposed. So you could maybe just sort of dwell on that for a couple of minutes for us to make us aware exactly what the plans would be if this was acceptable.
Thank you, Provost. When I initially looked at the design of the site and the topography of Glen Road, rising up to the crest and over the other side, I couldn't do exactly the same as what's on the opposite side of the road with all these properties having their individual drives. Because as you would see on site, if you were heading northward and you got to the crest of the hill and you were doing 30 miles an hour, and then the plots 7, 8, 9 going down the hill the other side, if they had their individual drives, potentially they would have been exiting their drive to oncoming traffic because they didn't have the relative junction visibility for a driveway. So I had to look at it, and at the crest of the hill, that's why there's 2 common drives going into the site. That submission was lodged, and the planners consulted with the roads transportation section. And Craig Russell, who's in charge of the roads department, said, results from the vehicle survey dictate that visibility displays measuring 2.4 by 60 metres are required from both proposed accesses onto Glen Road. The required displays are achievable from both accesses, though some roadside vegetation requires to be cut back. The required number of residence parking spaces has been provided within the curtilage of each property, and visitor parking is proposed on both shared accesses. All of these things, in addition, they would like for road safety of people coming out their drives and having to cross over to the footpath that was another side. He considered that there was a requirement that there should be a 2-metre wide footpath constructed along the entire 200-metre frontage of the full site. And he then said, in summary, if you are minded to grant permission, and if any matters satisfactory address, the following conditions are requested, and he's put in: vehicular access shall be via drop curbs, driveways shall be formed with maximum gradient 10%, visibility displays measuring 2.4 by 60 shall be provided, there shall be no obstruction to visibility greater than 600 millimetres in height above carriageway, and a 2-metre wide adoptable footpath circa 200 metres in length shall be formed in the development. So the road section supported and did not object to the application if planning permission was to be granted.
Okay, I just want you maybe to give us a wee bit more explanation, because I'm looking, I mean, it's a very lengthy document and it's took us about 2 or 3 days to go through this. But in your conclusion, you're stating here that the situation here is that on the opposite side of the road, a similar incremental development design has previously been approved by Falkirk Council, with the majority of these dwellings being constructed during the last 20 years. Well, I've said already, I've been part of the planning process and have been part of the decision making that's allowed all these sort of developments to go ahead up that one side of the road. So in terms of that, it says that a similar incremental development design has been previously approved with the majority of these. So what you saying in reality with that statement?
What I'm trying to propose is that it all hinges back to the policy documents which try to say it would be classed as ribbon development. Now, Gillis Guthrie, who lives in the very far house at the northern end, and then there was the old Glen House cottage that had been there for over 100 years. Houses within there were built, and then 3 houses were built into their backland development. All of these properties come out with their individual drives, but to achieve the visibility standards of these individual drives would be a hazard and would not have been acceptable to the roads department. So the design solution was that I had to take 2 common drives that come in and then run parallel with Glen Road, and that's the reason why the houses were set back slightly. But there's 9 houses going down on the north side of the road and on the northeastern side of the road, and there's 9 houses proposed. It was 8 for 8, and there's a 1 round on the opposite side. So of the scale, the detached, the density, it's reflective of a mirror image of what's on the other side. That's what I was proposing.
You're also saying, and I don't apologise for keep asking the question because that's what we're here for. A recommendation to approve this would complete this remaining unbuilt section of a 2-sided development. Now, we stood there and we had a good walk doing yesterday, and obviously we can see all these lovely houses on this one side.
Yes.
And one of the areas that I've always, and I think these were the arguments that's been put at previous developments, which obviously comes into this one as well, is that the unbuilt section of 2-sided development along the entire length of Glen Road up to the settlement edge, all within the current 30-mile-per-hour speed zone, because we've had the arguments before on this road in relation to other developments where it stated quite clearly that the 30-mile-an-hour speed zone and where it was signage was that was the end of the village limit. Now, what would you say about that?
That's basically the proposed development is extending but not going beyond the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit signs that are at the northern end of the village. I stated that all of the development coming up from the A9 all the way right up to the top is consented land, either built on or has an extant planning permission. There's a gap site that's there that is an extant planning permission halfway up the road on the left-hand side for 3 plots, but the Forestry Commission, they imposed an enforcement notice on that site, and they contest that their enforcement notice supersedes any planning permission that was granted. That planning permission was granted, the site was saved life in perpetuity, and that enforcement notice expires in June 25. And after that, then everything, the full entire length of Glen Road will be, if the planning permission was a decision taken to grant the 9 units currently on review, all of Glen Road would be two-sided development from Main Road to the 30 mile speed limit.
Right, thanks for that. Okay, Councillor McCluckie, I've not asked you to come in yet. You got an opportunity, sir.
Convener, I was originally going to wait to and just summarise everything at the end, because I'm the same as you. I've been out to Glen Road that many times over the years with the planning committee, and all the applications has been previously mentioned. We've been there and we've seen them, so we know the history very well. But I have a couple of comments, and I never say people are wrong. I always say, you know, over the years in the planning committee, you know, people can have different views. I never say anybody's wrong. Sometimes we've got different views of, you know, interpretations or take wee bits out. Mr. Gardner, you made a statement originally and you kind of answered what I was getting to later on. You said about the red squirrels, and it's very, it's delighted to see some of the red squirrels coming back. I seen one the other year in one area, which is the first for 20 years I've seen it, and yet when I was young, I was surrounded with them. I lived in Limerick, surrounded by forestry. So as I say, at that time. However, you made the point that you felt that the putting houses on this big ground here would result in the loss of the red squirrels. There was no house building in Limerick, but the greys came in and ate them and killed them. That because they're bigger, and you know, the fight for habitat. Where I've seen in small pockets of reds are where usually people, there's an abundance of food, and people in gardens and that where they feed them, so there's no necessarily competition. So sometimes for food, so you know, if you have big back gardens and that, and you're putting food down for the squirrels, and they're getting plenty to eat, they're no just as likely to thing me. Would you say that is pretty normal? I do know that the red squirrel is in a few islands now. They called the grey ones, and the reason that is they didn't want any grey ones. The water keeps them apart, because if the grey ones get across, they'll decimate the smaller regions. Is that not true?
What I'd say, it was interesting that you had experience when you were younger with red squirrels.
Yes.
The big difference in Torwood at the moment is that there's not enough of a population. They don't come to people's gardens to use feeders or anything like that. They completely rely on what natural resources are available. So it's the importance of those natural resources for those red squirrels. We're not in a situation, unfortunately, where people get red squirrels that they can feed in their gardens. That doesn't support the red squirrel population in Torwood. They require and rely on the local environment still.
What I'm saying is there isn't really there's small pockets throughout the place when it used to be quite thingweed. Right, my next question is to the lady from the Torwood Woodland. You say you represent several people in Torwood. Is all the people from the original boundary of Torwood, or have some of the people moved in and got planning permission in the countryside over the last number of years?
The people who are members of the Woodland Group and people that I've spoken to in the submission that we made on behalf of the Woodland Group have all lived in Torwood for between 25, 30 years. So they're long-term residents.
No, that's good. You answered that very thoroughly. My next question is relating to birds of prey. You're saying that there's owls and birds of prey in the area. I'm an expert in that as well. I used to have a pigeon loft right next to, as I says, in the middle of forestry, and the birds of prey came and ate them. As I says, my racing pigeons, and it's worse when you maybe win the race on the Saturday, and then the bird of prey ate them. But as I says, that is lifestyle of environment and the species. They've got to eat, but in that type of woodland, it's normally sparrowhawks, and they do obviously kill the small birds, the hen sparrowhawk. As I say, he takes larger ones, but the cock sparrowhawk kills the small birds, usually from the feeders. So as I say, what makes you think that this would alter the reasons? We've had discussions in the floor if we could reduce the number of sparrowhawks, but basically if you remove them, they just move into another area. You know, it's because they're thriving over the areas. It's usually the peregrines and that we're trying to keep, and the red harriers, and I've even had the goshawk up in Limerick as well. So I'm well averse. But what makes you think that this housing would affect birds of prey?
Can I make the comment back on that one?
I was making it to the lady that mentioned the birds of prey, but I mean, I'm quite happy for you to answer it.
Okay, but I think the question was posed to Joanna, so I'll give you the opportunity to come in here, Joanna.
Yeah. So you're asking me, Councillor, why I think this proposed development would be detrimental to birds of prey. Is that?
Yes.
Is that what,
Yeah, I say so.
Okay, because it just means that the forest area will just shrink even further. If you had taken a drone image of the woodland in Torwood, say 30, 40, 50 years ago, and take a new image today, you'll see how the woodland has been, it's under constant threat of development, and there's been a lot of development in and around the woodland. So obviously the area, birds of prey need a certain size of area in which to operate and hunt effectively. So any felling of trees, any reduction in the woodland will affect birds of prey, and it's not just sparrowhawks. There are buzzards, and obviously, as I've already mentioned, owls. In the past, there are tawny owls in the woodland, and there have been barn owls nesting up near the old castle at the top of the castle loam. So we have quite a variety of birds of prey, and they all rely on their habitat, having a natural, unspoiled habitat.
I appreciate that, and we've all got different views. There's 20 times the number of buzzards there was before, and these things, and obviously it's a change of lifestyle. And even in the middle of big villages, the birds of prey come into the back gardens, and there's no tree in sight. But we've all got different interpretations. I now speak to Mr. Blackwood from the forestry. Mr. Blackwood, I've got questions for you. When you issue a felling license, for example, what we see in the villages is usually when trees are predominantly not the type of trees that we've got here, but we get bats, small bats in the trees. We do get sparrowhawks in the type of trees, not necessarily the bigger birds of prey, because they usually go to the hardwood trees. But when you come in with a felling license into a bit of woodland that you can hardly even walk through because it's that converse and choked, and the trees are all dying because they haven't been thinned properly, and it's only good for wood pulp. When you go in there and you decide to clear fell, I take it you do not go in there and count every tree and look to see if there's a possibility a bat or a bird of prey nesting in it or whatever.
Thank you for your question. So just to highlight at the outset, and that so Scottish Forestry regulate the forest industry, so we provide permission to land managers and landowners to undertake tree felling. We do not therefore ourselves go out and take operational action to fell the trees. However, once we've approved a felling permission, to answer your question, yes, the land manager would do a kind of pre-operational check as part of kind of sustainable forest management, and they would check for protected species, whether it be squirrel drays or bird nests, and these species all are protected under their own legislation. But yes, as part of normal sustainable forest management, the forest manager should be checking for these species before any works are undertaken.
Well, as I say, we've all got different views, Mr. Blackwood, and as I say, my history is there used to be a forestry house in my village in Limerick, and then that went away. Maintenance of all the different water courses and that went away. The forestry took away the ponds that had great crested newts. They dug ditches to take the water away from to dry the areas up. And I actually created more ponds. An environment group and as a community activist, and I dammed up some of the ponds and I created pass through some of the woodlands. But as I say, if we're trying to preserve woodland, the best way of preserving woodland would be to thin out the trees. And one of the best ways to do that is to take the old trees out with a horse that can pull up in between them, because clear felling does not work. It scythens everything and it just lies there and is an eyesore to everything. If you take out the big trees, it lets light in for the smaller trees, and then they regenerate because they're already established and well up. That's the right way to do it, but it's not the way to make money. I understand that, but that is the best way forward for forestry to deliver that. As I say, that's my personal view of afforestation, and as I say, it's in my experience on that. But would you disagree with my comments?
No, I think your comments are correct. However, forest industry is a constantly moving and evolving industry, and it's also susceptible to market demands and the value of timber. So previously, timber prices were low, which may make operations such as thinning less economical. In terms of removing the forestry houses, I think I grew up in Kill, and there was a number of forestry villages there. And I think a big part of that was actually mechanisation, when we went from chainsaw to harvesters, and you didn't need the gangs of men in the woodland, every day managing it. And that obviously had benefits in some aspects and was detrimental in others, because management became more centralised and further away. In terms of not clear felling, I think as an industry we're moving towards what we call continuous cover forestry systems. However, they're not appropriate in all locations. So where parts of Scotland are quite exposed to wind, or maybe quite wet soils, then these sites aren't always appropriate for thinning out. But it actually, on the right sites, on sheltered sites, on good soils, thinning the woodland has actually been shown to create more value, because you gain value from the woodland that you thin out, and also it's better for ground flora biodiversity, and also adds more volume to the timber which you later fell. And as you say, it can reduce your cost for replanting and stuff, because it actually will start to regenerate itself. So yes, I would generally agree with your comments.
Convener, I'm only asking these questions because it's came up on the basis of two sides and the objectors and the statements today. Obviously, when you didn't thin out trees and they grow up together, the trees actually die. They're only good for wood pulp, and sometimes you get wind blow where they snap off about 6 or 8 feet. You get big tunnels and that. So I'm well versed of this type of thing. So I'm relate to that. But Mr. Blackwood, what do you say on the fact that another area of planting way more established for, saying, hardwood trees, the traditional style trees for habitat, would that not be as an environment thing? Like, I know you say that if plan is granted that's necessarily, and I'm glad you're saying that, but do you not think that an area prescribed for the type of woodland that would help habitat would be better than maybe what is there at the moment? Because what there is an eyesore at the moment, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting because we've been hearing that actually the woodland is quite rich in wildlife, and contains species such as red squirrel and owls, and I think a lot of the composition of the woodland is conifer or productive forestry, especially the larger area in Callander Estates. So I would say that there's maybe a misconception that productive forests can't hold and have habitat value. In terms of compensating in another area. Yes, if planning was approved, then we would expect compensation for the full area of the woodland to be applied, and we would really expect to see this approved through a kind of compensatory plan that meets UK Forest standard and conditioned as part of the approval. But approval of the application should trigger an environmental impact assessment in terms of deforestation. And I think at that stage, then you would have the assessment of what the species are, what the impact would be. But notably, as was mentioned before, taking an area of woodland out here, that removes that kind of viable current and future habitat potential, and then locating it somewhere else doesn't necessarily help the species within the woodland.
Next question is for Mr. Mitchell, convener. Mr. Mitchell, obviously you've thought of the area of another area, and they're saying that the habitat wouldn't move. My recollection, the birds is the fly, but as I say, I don't know. But would you see an issue, and have you got a point towards the approach that this compensatory planning planting would affect the wildlife in the area?
I think with the suggestion that I was wanting to put, if approved and there was compensatory planting provided, now that there's 252 acres that the applicant sold off to Calendar Estates, there's another 250 acres on another side. So 500 acres of Torwood woodland still in existence, but it's all going to be felled because the commercial woodlands will buy it, sell by date. By putting the compensatory planting down at the Blairs, the applicant owns the Blairs farm, and it borders all round the mature trees around Glenbervie golf course, and a lot of that is broadleaf, and that's where there's a benefit. And then in the LDP, representation for LDP2, the site of the Blairs was rejected, but the reporter made a lot of comments saying that woodland planting, one of them was the woodland planting proposed down at the Blairs would have been beneficial to the overall settlement, because there's woodland on the north side of the A9, is past Carbrook Cottage, and if you were linking all that and getting right round across to the Glenbervie woodland, and then that comes up the edge of there and gets into the woodland that comes right round in the back of the Torwood woodland at the back of Glen Road. So you can basically encompass the full village settlement with new woodland, and that was so. There's an advantage for putting that compensated woodland planting down there, and that would be a benefit to the wildlife that's down there. I think with the 500 acres that are still in existence in the Torwood, there's going to be a lot of broadleaf planting carried out in there over the next 25 years. But that's a large expanse of woodland for the current wildlife that are existing in the Torwood Forest at present.
You mentioned obviously Guy Weatherburn, obviously there, and we've had the pleasure, obviously, working in a number of ventures, and they do great work in the estates that they manage, and thoroughly understand that. So thank you, Alistair. My next question is for you. Local plan. I seem to have been here before, but the local plan, we're always told, is continuing development. It takes us a few years to make the local plan up, but then things can change quite. Is that not true? Quickly, is that not true?
Yeah, I mean local planning is always up against changes in economic conditions, and market conditions. Yeah, so sometimes it feels like you're chasing your tail. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, I understand that. I mean, and as I said before, I would never do your job, Alistair, right? And I've never managed to understand the reporters either. Reporters tend to have their own interpretations. They certainly didn't take the views of elected members of Falkirk, but they're entitled to their decision, and the local plan's a legal document. So once it's passed, that's that. So we've got to look at it because, like you say, you've said for your views contrary to local plan, but in so much else that's happened in Torwood that we've been out there, we've made exceptions into all these previous ones. I remember the first property we went at, Mr. Block, it then set a precedent for the houses next to it because it went into the woodland to square it off there and similar things. I also see the point about when we were out the other day, without a doubt it would have benefited for a pavement on the other side because constantly we had to go and jump up onto the banking because of the speed the vehicles were making from as soon as they came by the houses on the left hand side, they were fleeing. There was a tractor going up there, it must have been, I thought it was going to take off, a big massive tractor as well. But the speed of the vehicles at that side. Now, roads tell us that they have different views sometimes, the planning officers, but roads say that you come into the village boundary when you see lights. That signals that you're into the village boundary, and obviously there's lights and that on one side of the road. But because there's no houses, vehicles tend to speed up because they see countryside. So it has been mentioned that we haven't altered the local plan on all the numerous planning decisions that elected members took to relate to Torwood. So can you ask if that is going to be looked at, or why did we not look at that before? Because some of the decisions we've took in the local plan, putting several hundred houses at Bowness, houses in Larbert, houses in Madison, right, folk that didn't want, but it did seem more acceptable. I don't know the people in Torwood, if you square off a village and hey, the houses that basically stop at the one bit, so they ken where the village stops. So you anything to add to that?
Well, I think we don't always automatically adjust the village or urban limit when in response to planning permissions being granted for houses around the periphery of the settlement. And what we need to do is to look at the logic of the boundary. It may be that adjustment will make the boundary weaker and more vulnerable to further development, whether it's backland or infill or whatever. So it's a judgment that has to be made, and every case is different. So yeah, I think that's it's horses for courses really. It's what that boundary would actually, is that still a robust boundary effectively?
We haven't a crystal ball, Alistair, and I appreciate that because we had quite close in the local plan for 15 years, and then we took it out because nobody was interested, and then suddenly everybody in their family all wanted to build in Whitecross, and we've put the developments in there. But things are ever changing, and nobody can account for that or ken that these things are going to happen. So, as I say, is we always value your knowledge and input. So that's me finished with questions, Commissioner.
Thank you. I've got one question, and I'll bring Councillor Kerry. He's not had an opportunity to speak, but he's sitting at the back of me here because his computer's down. The question is to the planning advisor. Can you advise us how many objections have been to this application? Just a simple question, John. The reason I'm asking that is because many occasions that we've been up to Torwood, we've faced quite large contingents of locals that were objecting to whatever was proposed. So can you tell me how many objectors?
I believe there was 10, convener.
But written?
Yep, I'm just looking at the papers just now. In terms of the application, you're with it. I believe there was 10.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring Councillor Kerry. He's been waiting patiently. I'm going to bring him in. And thanks everybody for the deliberations. But obviously, this is an important issue for everybody. It's an important issue for, first of all, the applicant. It's an important issue for the people that live there. And it's an important issue for the officials. And it's important for the members as well in terms of openness and transparency. So I'll bring in Councillor Kerry at this stage. I'll move my... You want to come closer, sir?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Provost. I've listened intensely to the debate and the questions and answers. And Mrs. Stevenson, I appreciate what you're saying regarding what Torwood was like 50, 60 years ago. Every place is the same, every village and town that I represent, small villages up Upper Braes, and they're the same. But there's things that we can't influence and things we can. Anyway, for questions, I've got a few questions for probably Mr. Shaw to start with. And the key thing for me is on page 68 regarding the outline, the red line around the village limits. And it was stated, I think it was yourself, Alistair, or it maybe have been John, regarding development H52, and that the houses were the curb line. On the visit the other day there, and I must say, convener, that it was very advantage for to be and see the site. But I can assure you, there are none of these houses in H52 along the curb. Anyway, for my summary, and I don't know if it was Mr. Mitchell that's mentioned this or not, but on the same side as the proposed development, there are 14 developments that are curb line and one which is offset to the curb line. But my concern is, if you're looking at the page 68, at the back of the development, there are 3 houses there that are out with the village limits. Then across from the village where the proposed development is, there's 1, 2, 3, one looks like a large house and 3, 4 other houses. So my question to you, Alistair, is how are these not incorporated in the village limits if they're already built?
I think I would respond as I did to Councillor McCluckie that we look at the logic of the boundary with the possibility that moving that boundary might make it weaker, may make it more vulnerable to further back and undesirable backland development or infill development. So it's a judgment that we make. The houses to the rear of that have been built to the rear of Mr. Block's house, which is down on to the southwest side. For instance, I was taking the urban limit in to encompass those would push the village limit further back into the woodland, and it could invite further applications for rounding off for backland development. So it's about the logic of it's not just about necessarily what's there. It's about what makes a sensible and defensible boundary. Mr. Mitchell mentioned the ones down at the southern end on the A9 that have been built, the big houses that have been built on the other side of the road. That wouldn't make sense as a village extension because it's on the other side of the road. it's kind of detached from the village proper, and again, it could create pressure for further rounding off on the other side of the road and further development along the road. So there's a range of considerations. It's not just the fact that there's a house built there. You have to think about what the logic of the boundary is.
Right, okay. I don't agree with you at that point, because the houses are built, so if you put it tight to the back of the houses.
Yep.
Right, okay, thanks for that, Alistair. With regards to the development, and it's about the same side as I mentioned, the 14 houses. And I don't know if it was yourself or Mr. Blackwood who mentioned Ancient Woodland. So I was saying that these houses that's built down already have been built on Ancient Woodland. Or does the Ancient Woodland is it just at that bit where the application is?
I think, most of these houses have been there for a very long time. I don't have, it may even predate the inventory of Ancient Woodland. I really can't help you on that front.
Alistair, when was the last time you were out there?
I was out a few weeks ago.
And you didn't see all the big new houses on that side?
Sorry, are we which side are we talking about?
The same side as the development, but further down. Sorry if I was unclear.
Further south.
See where the development is? A proposed development.
Yeah.
And you've got the wee kind of road at the side there. Then you've got two houses. Then you've got a gap. Then you've got a bit that kicks out. But it looks like, well, it is a large house because I seen it the other day there, and 3 houses at the back of it.
Yeah.
Surely they would have been in the woodlands.
Those ones, I don't think they were. I think that was effectively garden ground for Mr. Block's house, which is the big house in the frontage. But I can't. I'm not. When these houses, well, certainly when the original house was built, I don't know if there was woodland on the site. That goes back even beyond my time in the country.
Mr. Blackwood, have you any idea?
No, I can't comment to that at the moment. It would be possible to determine though through checking past maps, which would show the kind of wooded area over a number of years or decades.
Okay, thank you very much. I've listened to Councillor Hughes and Councillor McCluskey and Provost Buchanan, and I feel that the development fits in the boundary. And looking at the boundary line, I think the development would benefit if it came up to, but not beyond, the village limits. And I would propose that the development, even though it's contrary to the local development plan, however, I think material consideration in the form of HCO1 windfall housing and PE14 countryside development, and it fits within the boundary. Thanks, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come in here, Councillor McCluskey?
Aye, I'll come in, convener. It's rare that I support loss of tree planting, because I believe we need far more woodland, and I support Falkirk Council's view on that. However, here the problem is, and if I mind, reference was made by my colleague there about the original backland development. I think it was Mr. Blocks, and at one time there was trees there, and it was, I think, you know, they extended the garden back, and then that set the ball rolling. Council policy is that you put down, is there any trees in a bit of ground, and the planning hanging, and you put down no, but it may be that you've cut them all down the day before you filled in the planning application and there's no trees, you know what I mean? But that's the issue of the history. But I tend to agree. I was concerned the other day for safety. I'm concerned for the residents there with the speed that these vehicles are going up that road, because nobody kens where the boundary, and even the day we have been quite difficult to fathom out where the boundary of the village stops. But getting a pavement on that other side and getting you know, a definitive road edge might slow the vehicles down going up that road and keep people safe. I also believe that the damage was done with these Clearfell in these areas years ago, and we should have considered it better. And if we go get another piece of ground and plant it in the way that we see to get community use of woodland, not for both for felling, but for also the environment and from the global warming. But we can go and also make them a great place to walk and use. What I've seen at that site, there's a wall at the back of it, so you're not going to get access at the front there anyway. The trees were compact together, and at the back of that it was all Clearfell, although there is some regeneration. But I see that houses were more pleasant to look at than that. And I think that the wildlife with extensive gardens in the back, going out onto the hill, going up, I think it'll enhance the habitat there. And as I say, if this other planting gets done better, so I'm tending to agree that they support the proposal. But as I say, it's unusual for me to do that, but I see advantages this time in it.
Okay, thanks for that. So we've got a motion moving seconded. Councillor Hughes, come in at this stage, sir.
Thank you very much, convener. On this occasion, I take a contrary view to my colleagues. And listening to all the evidence this morning, I believe that this development is contrary to the development plan and is, in that respect, is then within the countryside. And also, I do have concern for biodiversity. And in that sense, my motion to you would be that this application should be refused.
Okay, that'll be, thank you for that, Councillor Hughes. So that's an amendment to the motion, which was first of all moved by Councillor Kerr, seconded by Councillor McCluckie to agree to grant the application. Councillor Hughes has come in with an amendment to refuse the application based on a number of issues, including the biodiversity and the local plan. Would that be correct, Councillor Hughes?
Yes, thank you, convener.
That's fine. Well, I've got to take the view, obviously, I've been listening. We've been over, I think, 2 hours. It's been a really, really good debate. And having been in Torwood on numerous occasions for developments, in fact, I think the last time we were there, we were up by the village limit when we refused a house up at the end because there was other problems. But in terms of this, I've got to listen to what the planning agent was saying, and I was reading, because obviously this is a lengthy document, and it's been taking a long time to read it. But I believe that this will improve the area, and I think what it will do, it will round off the area and have the developments on both sides. I think so. I'm actually going to support this with the other two members in relation to the fact that it would be improving. Councillor Kerr's highlighted the policy issues, in relation to housing in the countryside. And I believe that the impact on the proposed biodiversity and so forth, the constraints and the value, we've already discussed that. We've discussed the formal and informal rights of way and access routes associated within and out with the development. I don't think there's any problems with that. And the impact of policies relating to housing in the countryside, which Councillor Kerr had stated, the impact of the proposed development on the existing surrounding area, and clarification of the village boundary limit. And I think that I think it's been quite clear today that there'll need to be adjustments to this boundary, because it was highlighted in the maps, both that was shown by the agent and also by the maps and what it was shown by Councillor Kerr in relation to what's been built there in the past. I'm quite happy to say quite clearly that I think it will be advantageous, and I think it'll set and maybe finish off that development in that area. And I would say at this stage that I would be asking Mr. Shaw, our officer, to have a look to ensure that that this village boundary limit and the applications that have come in before that have been spoken about this morning are included, so that we get an up-to-date version on this issue. In terms of other areas that we spoke about was compensatory, and there'll be conditions in relating to other issues like education, etc., maybe transport. And other than that, I'll come back to our legal officer, Mr. Douglas Blythe, if he requires any more information or would like any further clarification from members on the decision that's been made.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, so I think we do need some clarification on the direction of travel that members appear to be heading into. The motion from Councillor Kerr cites policies HCO to PE 14, and there was also, I think, a general reference to policy PE 01. I think that came out of Councillor McCluckey's seconding of the motion. I think there are some areas potentially of where I'm minded to grant maybe the more appropriate means of decision. Namely, there are some contributions that were sought in the consultation responses towards education, and I think there was an agreed contribution towards Slarbert High School.
Yeah.
There's issues around the compensatory planting, and I think the devil will be in the detail with the location and the scheme. But I think broadly in terms of a Section 75, that would be an area of conditionality that would have to be fleshed out and explored with the applicant and with the involvement of Scottish Forestry. I think Mr. Shaw referred to the potential contribution towards the Green and Blue network, and I think maybe with Mr. Shaw's indulgence, I think he did refer to rates that were that we could refer to. Did I pick you up correctly, Alistair?
I can't remember. I mean, I think it was just the generality, but I have spoken to our outdoor access team, and they have costings that they're working on costings that might be of use here. So
I think thanks Alistair. I think in that case then it'd be a case of a contribution towards the Green and Blue network to be agreed between the applicants and the appropriate officers in place services.
So what we're saying then is, Douglas, it would be amended to grant subject to appropriate conditions. Would that cover everything?
I think it would be minded to grant subject to a Section 75 agreement or other legal agreement, Provost, to cover those issues that I've just highlighted, and also thereafter, once that's completed, subject to any appropriate conditions that would be delegated to the Director of Police Services. I think some of the conditions were were flagged up in the papers, certainly in the report and handling, and without going into minute detail at this stage, I think if that was delegated to the appropriate director to encompass those conditions in any permission, then that could be taken care of. I could maybe ask, I wonder if I could just ask Mr. Milne if you had anything else to add.
John?
Yes, convener. Just listening to the conversation, I agree with Douglas that minded to grant would be perhaps be considered the appropriate course, because there are elements here that can't be covered by planning condition, and so they have to be covered by legal agreement. And Douglas has already touched on these three essential items being the compensatory planting element, the contribution to the Green and Blue network, and the education contributions. These can't be covered by planning conditions, they have to be covered by legal agreement. In terms of the conditions itself, just taking a rough sketch of what the members are considering, we're probably looking at conditions relating to existing and proposed ground levels. We're looking at conditions relating to the landscape details on the site. We're looking at a condition regarding materials to be used in the house types.
Yeah.
We're looking at boundary finishes and materials. We're perhaps looking at flood risk, drainage and surface water drainage strategy on the site. We're looking at low and zero carbon development. We're looking at the roads and highways conditions as per the consultation responses. We're looking at contaminated land condition, and we're looking at streetscape details. Now, these are not exhaustive. These are only what I've gleaned from the conversations, with the application. And I would like your indulgence that any other matters considered appropriate by the Director of Police Services can be considered as conditions as well.
Well, I'll go back to the mover of the motion, Councillor Kerr. You've heard Mr. Blythe and Mr. Milne. Are you happy with what's been said? It will be amended to grant, subject to what our officers are saying.
Happy with that.
I wonder, Convener Tonya here, could I ask a procedural question which I've asked in the past? If Councillor Hughes would wish recorded his dissent, that's happened in the past at certain members of committees' request. Is that something you'd like recorded, Councillor? Or
yes, if you don't mind.
Yes, right. I'll record that.
That's a good point, Tonya, and I would be recording it myself. Thank you. Douglas, do you require anything else?
No, and I think Tonya's point's a good one, Provost. And that was only, I think we've read the room. There are 3 members who are in favour of this proposal, and Councillor Hughes was unable to get a seconder for his. So in those circumstances, his dissent could be recorded in the minute.
Okay, you're happy with that? So is that us then, Douglas?
I've got no further procedure.
I'd just like to say this to Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner, just to let you know that we're not in the same room because you've got the same backdrop as me. I don't know if you noticed that. And this is my Manhattan office. So
it's the opposite way around. I think we've got the opposite way around.
Anyway, I would just like to thank your good self and Joanna for your input on behalf of yourself and your communities. I'd like to thank the officers for coming and the members.
You're muted, Provost.
You're muted.
Just to thank everybody for their input today and have a safe journey home. Thank you.